Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into a world you probably won't survive this without a little empathy. The life of women in 1800s, America who had no husbands. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? What time is it where you are? Jot that down in your mind, because as we wander together through history, your own little corner of the world might feel strangely connected to the quiet parlours, bustling kitchens and lonely boarding rooms of the past. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself stepping into an early 19th century town, cobblestones underfoot, smoke curling from chimneys, the smell of baked bread and horse manure mingling in the air. In this world, having no husband is more than a personal choice. It's a social hazard, a legal quagmire, and often an economic nightmare. Women who were unmarried, whether by circumstance or personal resolve, lived under a lens of suspicion and judgment. Society whispered about spinsters, not always cruelly, but always with a sort of curious fascination. These were women who defied the expected path: marriage, motherhood, and domestic submission. Without a husband, they had to navigate a world that assumed dependency, often forcing them to invent creative ways to survive. Legally, the system was stacked against you. The doctrine of coverture, which dominated much of early American law, declared that upon marriage, a woman's legal identity was absorbed into her husband's. Property she had inherited or earned often became his. But as a single woman, you existed in a kind of liminal legal space, technically free, but without many of the protections men and married women enjoyed. You could own property in some states, yet banks might refuse you loans, landlords could charge you more, and employers often paid you less, or not at all, for the same work a man would do. This precarious position required cunning, networking, and sometimes a dash of audacity. Daily life for an unmarried woman might involve work that was socially acceptable for her gender, yet physically and mentally exhausting. You might teach children in a local schoolhouse, hand-stitch garments as a seamstress, or clean for wealthier families. Each option offered a modest income but little social prestige. The labour was relentless, and failure meant destitution. Yet paradoxically, these roles gave you autonomy unavailable to many married women. You decided when and where to work, and occasionally whom to associate with. Some women quietly cherished this freedom, even while society sneered. At the same time, gossip and societal expectation loomed large. Families often pressured unmarried daughters into marriages, whether convenient or romantic. You could be gently nudged or sharply cajoled into the marriage market, even as you dreamed of independence. Spinsterhood wasn't just a personal state, it was a public statement, interpreted as either tragic or eccentric. And yet, communities sometimes found ways to accommodate you, particularly if you were willing to teach, care for neighbours' children, or assist in church work. Unmarried women occupied a strange duality: necessary yet marginal, visible yet constrained. Boarding houses and communal living arrangements became practical solutions for independence. In cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and New York, you could rent a small room, often shared with other women, and form networks of support. These networks were more than social, they were lifelines. Shared meals, collective childcare, or pooled income from small crafts created resilience in the face of social scorn and financial precarity. Some boarding houses even developed a quirky reputation for eccentricity, with residents adopting peculiar habits, pets, or decor that modern historians find amusingly charming. There are tales of women who kept cages of exotic birds or tiny rooftop gardens, transforming survival into small defiant joys. Religious communities also offered sanctuary. Some women found roles in churches or convents, where they could live respectably, contribute to charitable work, and gain a sense of purpose. These spaces could also be hotbeds of intellectual exchange, with women reading scripture, writing reflections, and debating theology, activities often denied to them in secular life. Quirky fringe practices emerged too, such as groups of women experimenting with herbal medicine or informal schooling within the church halls. The boundaries between survival, devotion, and eccentricity were fluid. Even without marriage, property ownership remained possible, though tricky. Certain states allowed unmarried women, often labelled femmes sole, to inherit land, manage businesses, or rent rooms. This legal loophole created fascinating pockets of independence. Some women used property to run boarding houses, small stores, or even farms. Scholars debate whether these women were truly liberated or simply exceptional anomalies. Their stories amplified because they broke norms. The quiet resistance embedded in managing one's own property, earning a living, and maintaining a household without a husband reflected both resilience and necessity. Education emerged as another lifeline. Academies for girls offered literacy, arithmetic, and even languages, skills that translated directly into teaching jobs or running a business. Education also opened doors to subtle influence. Some women became writers, diarists, or correspondents, chronicling their lives and shaping local opinion. The scholarly debate continues. Were educated single women stepping stones to empowerment, or were they merely tolerated as socially useful curiosities? Your own nighttime imagination can wander in this grey zone, picturing a woman hunched over a candle, pen scratching against paper, while outside the 19th century town sleeps under its dim lanterns. Even within the privacy of home, unmarried women face challenges. Healthcare was rudimentary, social safety nets were minimal, and the spectre of loneliness loomed large. Some developed inventive remedies or quirky coping strategies, from herbal tinctures to midnight walks in empty streets. Others documented these practices in advice manuals, which now provide historians with fascinating glimpses of self-reliance and cultural nuance. The combination of necessity, resourcefulness, and societal constraint shaped a life that was quietly heroic in ways often overlooked. By the time evening descends fully, you can imagine yourself sitting by a small fire, thinking of these women who navigated an unforgiving world without the conventional protections of a husband. There's a subtle triumph in their survival, a quiet assertion of autonomy wrapped in everyday rituals, a meticulously mended dress, a perfectly tended garden, or a diary entry that confides dreams no one else might understand. You might even feel a gentle kinship across centuries, as if the soft hum of your fan echoes the quiet resolve of women who refuse to vanish into obscurity despite societal odds. So tonight, as you drift further into this exploration, consider that life for a woman without a husband in the 1800s was never simple. It was a tapestry of legal limbo, economic ingenuity, social scrutiny, and personal courage, embroidered with quirks, clever workarounds, and occasional moments of joy. The debate among historians about whether these women were oppressed or quietly empowered continues, but as you lie here in your modern comfort, you can appreciate the complexity without judgment, feeling the slow heartbeat of history settle around you like a warm, reassuring blanket. As the soft glow of your lamp brushes across your room, let's wander deeper into the world of unmarried women in 1800s, America, and the legal constraints that shaped their lives. You might think that being free from a husband meant freedom, but in reality, laws often made independence a precarious tightrope walk. In most states, the law treated women as legal minors, unless they married or were widowed. A single woman, what lawyers called a feme sole, could sign contracts, own property, and run a business, but only in narrow circumstances and often under scrutiny. Imagine walking into a bank and being asked to prove you're competent enough to borrow money just because the law doubted you could manage your own affairs. That was the world you were entering. The legal doctrine of coverture loomed over every interaction. Once a woman married, her legal identity essentially merged with her husband's, erasing her independent rights. But if you were unmarried, you technically retained control over property and income, though wielding this power required cunning. Some women used the title feme sole strategically, signing leases, buying small plots of land, or investing in local businesses. There were rare stories of women negotiating contracts so complex that even seasoned lawyers were impressed. Quiet victories in a system that preferred to keep you dependent. Yet, even these successes carried risk. A lawsuit or social gossip could threaten not just finances but your very reputation. Society's judgment was relentless, and the law was a double-edged sword. On one hand, you had legal rights that married women didn't. On the other, unmarried women were constantly under suspicion. A single woman running a shop or boarding house might face neighbours' whispers, "She's too bold for her own good," or "Who knows what she's doing in there?" Even city officials occasionally tried to limit her business licenses, citing morality or proper social behaviour. These pressures were subtle, but constant, reminding you that independence was never fully yours. It had to be defended every day, often with a mixture of grace, wit, and quiet stubbornness. Despite these obstacles, some states enacted surprisingly progressive laws for unmarried women. In Massachusetts, for instance, a femme sole could inherit property, sue and be sued, and manage her financial affairs. These loopholes created pockets of autonomy where women could not only survive but thrive. One fascinating anecdote involves a woman in Salem who inherited a modest shop from her brother. She transformed it into a bustling sewing and millinery business, sending subtle ripples of influence through her community. Local historians debate whether this kind of agency was widespread or the exception. Were most women merely surviving under the law's strictures or quietly pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable? Then there's the quirky side of legal ingenuity. Some women went so far as to sign contracts under pseudonyms or used male relatives as intermediaries to protect their finances. One eccentric story tells of a woman who repeatedly sued a local merchant over unpaid debts, always showing up in court with a meticulously embroidered shawl, earning her the nickname the Lace Avenger. These tales highlight how law, society, and personal ingenuity intertwined. They also remind you that navigating legality wasn't just practical. It could be an art form, a delicate dance between survival, propriety, and subtle rebellion. The scholarly debate about unmarried women's legal status is still lively today. Some historians argue that laws like coverture were oppressive chains, keeping women subservient and limiting societal participation. Others contend that the mere existence of femme sole provisions offered a rare form of female agency, empowering women to control property, work independently, and even influence community affairs. As you settle deeper into your pillow tonight, you can appreciate the nuance. The law wasn't simply a tool of oppression, nor was it a golden ticket to freedom. It was a terrain to navigate, full of hidden pitfalls and occasional triumphs. Even simple matters like inheritance could become legal labyrinths. Imagine being left a small plot of land by an uncle, only to discover that a distant cousin is contesting the will. You would need to hire a lawyer, if you could afford one, and attend hearings, often in intimidating courtrooms dominated by men who doubted your intelligence simply because you were unmarried. Some women managed these challenges with remarkable skill, turning inheritance disputes into opportunities to assert authority and social standing. Others quietly suffered losses, their stories forgotten except in dusty court records. The spectrum of outcomes reminds you that resilience often looked different from person to person. Economic survival intertwined closely with legal strategy. If you owned property, you could rent it, open a shop, or take in boarders, but every decision was informed by both law and social expectation. Renting to the wrong tenant or running a business deemed inappropriate could provoke complaints or legal scrutiny. A single woman in Philadelphia, for instance, ran a small bakery while simultaneously teaching Sunday school. Her neighbours tolerated her dual role, but she constantly navigated a fine line between independence and social acceptability. Her story might seem mundane, yet it's emblematic of the daily negotiation between law, society, and personal survival that unmarried women faced. Religious institutions often intersected with legal protections. Some churches provided women with moral legitimacy, helping them defend property claims or negotiate business arrangements. In certain cases, a woman could be both a respected church worker and a successful shop owner, using her moral authority to bolster her legal and economic position. The quirky interplay between faith and law produced curious anecdotes. Women who invoked biblical passages to argue inheritance disputes, or who wore ceremonial robes to court hearings for added gravitas. These colourful stories bring texture to the otherwise austere landscape of legal struggle. By the time night deepens, you can picture yourself wandering a quiet town in 1820s America, the windows shuttered, gas lamps flickering, and imagining the lives of women negotiating legality with skill, wit, and quiet determination. You feel the tension between societal expectation and personal autonomy, the strange freedom afforded by narrow legal loopholes, and the constant vigilance required to survive in a world that both permitted and distrusted your independence. You can almost hear the soft click of ledger books, the whispered advice of neighbours, and the faint hum of debate that filled church halls and courtrooms alike. So tonight, as you settle further into comfort, remember that unmarried women's legal landscape was not just about law. It was about navigating opportunity, constraint, and survival with careful precision. The stories are peppered with triumph, occasional eccentricity, and enduring debates about freedom versus oppression. Lean back breathe deeply, and imagine the gentle pulse of life that persisted for those women, whose quiet resilience left ripples in history waiting for you to notice and appreciate. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and the soft hum of the evening settles around you, let's drift into the work options available to women without husbands in 1800s America. You might imagine that being unmarried limited your life to mere survival, but in truth, work offered both a lifeline and a subtle form of independence. Picture yourself rising before dawn, the smell of burning wood and coffee filling the small room you call home, preparing to step out into a world where your labour defines both your survival and your social identity. Whether teaching, sewing, or domestic service, your work is your lifeline, and the rhythm of your day is dictated by contracts, expectations, and occasionally your own clever improvisations. Teaching was one of the most respectable avenues for unmarried women. You could be employed at a small local schoolhouse, where children's voices echoed against wooden walls, or in the modest classroom of a private academy. Education for girls was expanding in the early 19th century, and as a teacher you were not only earning a living but participating in shaping the next generation. The hours were long, discipline was strict, and salaries were modest. Yet teaching carried a social cachet that other labour could not. Parents trusted you with their children's futures, which also subtly granted you authority in the community, a rare commodity for a woman on her own. Seamstress work offered another pathway, blending artistry, skill, and practicality. You could spend hours bent over fabric, the rhythmic clatter of scissors and needles forming a gentle meditation, as you stitched gowns, shirts, or quilts. Your hands, though tired at the end of the day, were instruments of both survival and creativity. Some women specialised in intricate embroidery, turning clothing into small works of art, while others focused on mending worn garments for the neighbourhood, building trust and a steady clientele. In larger cities, some seamstresses operated tiny shops from their homes, attracting customers who appreciated both craftsmanship and the safety of dealing with a respectable unmarried woman. Domestic service was another common option, though it carried a more precarious balance between independence and dependence. You might clean wealthy households, cook meals, or serve as a nanny, often living in the employer's home and navigating the strict hierarchies of etiquette and propriety. While these jobs were tiring and sometimes exploitative, they provided not only income but also room and board, which could be vital for survival. Some women became indispensable to the families they served, forming bonds and networks that offered limited but significant social mobility. In some quirky cases, women even became local celebrities, known for their meticulous kitchens, inventive recipes, or uncanny ability to manage unruly children, skills historians now recognise as essential forms of social capital. Entrepreneurial ingenuity emerged in surprising ways. Some women ran boarding houses or small shops, blending business acumen with social navigation. In Boston, one unmarried woman transformed a tiny rented room into a boarding house for other single women, creating a micro-community where meals, laundry, and advice were shared. She became known as a kind of local sage. Her quirky habits, like serving tea at precisely 3 o'clock with delicate sugar cubes, endearing her to clients. These ventures allowed women to step outside the rigid domestic sphere and claim some measure of economic power, even if the law and society remained skeptical observers. Yet even as work offered opportunity, it also exposed you to risks. Wages were consistently lower than men's, harassment was common, and contracts could be unreliable. A young woman might teach in one town, only to find her salary delayed or her position terminated because a male counterpart arrived. Quirky strategies emerged to cope. Some women formed informal guilds or partnerships to pool income and protect clients, while others relied on their reputations for skill or propriety to negotiate better terms. These efforts highlight how independence for unmarried women was rarely solitary. It was communal, strategic, and sometimes quietly defiant. The scholarly debate around women's work in the 1800s is surprisingly lively. Some historians argue that unmarried women were trapped in a limited labour market, constrained by gendered expectations and legal restrictions. Others point out that work offered a rare avenue for independence, social influence, and even financial security. As you sink further into your pillow tonight, you can see the nuance. Work was both a survival strategy and a subtle form of resistance, a way to assert competence in a world predisposed to doubt you. Every stitch, every ledger entry, every lesson taught carried weight far beyond its immediate utility. It was a statement of selfhood. Quirky anecdotes pepper the historical record, reminding us that survival often involved creativity and personality. One woman, for instance, ran a small sewing business while secretly tutoring boys in Latin, arguing that intellectual engagement sharpened both mind and reputation. Another kept a small aviary on her apartment balcony, claiming the birds inspired her designs and soothed her clients' nerves. These odd but charming details remind you that the life of an unmarried working woman wasn't just toil, it was also punctuated by curiosity, small joys, and personal flair, all woven into the fabric of survival. Urban life offered further variety. In cities like Philadelphia and New York, unmarried women could find opportunities in printing shops, millinery, or as typists and scribes, particularly as literacy and commerce expanded. Even marginal roles like running a modest stall in a market or serving as a governess could provide autonomy and the chance to build social networks. The constant thread is adaptability. Surviving alone meant observing, improvising, and sometimes flouting convention in subtle ways. One eccentric example involves a woman who advertised her tutoring services on small handbills and included a tiny rhyme to attract attention. Her marketing skills earned her both steady income and a local reputation as the clever poet-teacher. Health and daily rhythms intertwined with work. Long hours, exposure to harsh weather, and physical labour were common, yet the mental engagement of teaching or crafting provided balance. Evening walks, small social visits, or church gatherings became necessary respite, moments where the monotony and stress of labour could be softened. You can imagine yourself following in her footsteps, listening to the clatter of a cart along cobblestones, smelling the faint aroma of bread baking in nearby ovens, or watching children's laughter spill across a schoolyard. In these sensory details, the struggle of work blends with tiny pleasures, reminding you that survival was more than endurance. It was also rhythm, habit, and occasional delight. By the time night fully embraces your room, the lives of unmarried women at work reveal a delicate balance of necessity, skill, and quiet resistance. Teaching, sewing, domestic service, or small entrepreneurship were more than chores. They were lifelines, statements of competence, and subtle ways of claiming space in a world that often denied them. You can feel the pulse of determination, the soft hum of resilience, and the quirky personal touches that made each day a testament to ingenuity. Tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, let the image linger. Women, hands busy, minds alert, hearts quietly asserting agency, weaving survival into artistry, one stitch, one lesson, one decision at a time. As your eyelids grow heavier and the soft murmur of your fan lulls the room, let's drift into the world of social perception, the stigma of spinsterhood in 1800s America. Imagine stepping onto a quiet street, the evening fog curling around gas lamps, and feeling the weight of judgment pressing down, not from any one person, but from an entire society. Being unmarried wasn't just a personal status, it was a public statement, interpreted in whispers, sideways glances, and small comments at church or market. The term spinster carried layers of meaning. It could imply misfortune, eccentricity, or even moral deficiency, depending on who was speaking. And even today, the echoes of these judgments offer insight into the subtle, relentless social machinery of the era. In towns and cities alike, unmarried women often face social isolation. Parties, weddings, and family gatherings could be uncomfortable landscapes where gossip flowed freely. You might overhear neighbours speculate about why you hadn't married yet. She's too proud, she's too picky, or perhaps the more cutting. No one could stand her temperament. These whispered judgments weren't always cruelly intended. They were often framed as concern. But the effect was unmistakable. Pressure to conform, to find a husband, and to fit neatly into expected gender roles. Walking through a town square, you'd be keenly aware of the eyes and unspoken evaluations, the subtle choreography of propriety guiding every step. Even within family networks, the stigma was palpable. Parents, siblings, and relatives could oscillate between support and mild exasperation, sometimes trying to place unmarried women in homes or nudge them towards suitable suitors. A single aunt might be summoned repeatedly to a cousin's wedding, all while being asked if she herself had found someone appropriate. While these moments could feel frustrating, they were also a form of social surveillance. Society used family, community, and neighbourhood networks to enforce norms, keeping unmarried women in a constant state of self-conscious negotiation. The media of the time, from newspapers to advice manuals, reinforced these expectations. Magazines offered guidance on how to appear respectable, attract a husband, and navigate social events. Oddly, some publications included humorous or quirky advice, like recommending that spinsters carry a small mirror in their purse to catch the eye of a gentleman, or to always have an embroidered handkerchief at the ready. These instructions reveal both the creativity and the absurdity of social pressure, and reading them now, you can't help but smile at the blend of earnestness and whimsy. Religious life intersected strongly with social stigma. Churches often emphasized marriage and family as moral imperatives, framing single women as spiritually incomplete or morally suspect. Yet, paradoxically, they also offered spaces where women could assert respectability through service, teaching Sunday school, tending to the sick, or managing charitable collections. Here, you can see the delicate balancing act. Unmarried women had to navigate judgment while carving out opportunities for influence and purpose. Quirky stories emerged too, like women who staged miniature plays at church socials, earning admiration and gossip in equal measure, turning social expectation into creative expression. Historians debate the true impact of stigma. Some argue that unmarried women were oppressed, confined to the margins of social life, and subject to constant judgment. Others suggest that the stigma, while real, often coexisted with spaces of agency, autonomy, and even subtle power. For example, an unmarried woman running a boarding house or school might wield influence over employees, students, and clients that married women could not, precisely because she wasn't legally or socially tied to a husband. As you imagine these dynamics tonight, it's clear that social judgment wasn't always straightforward. It could oppress, shape, or even empower, depending on circumstances. Community perceptions were sometimes tempered by visible competence. A woman who excelled in her craft, whether sewing, teaching, or running a shop, could earn respect even while remaining unmarried. One charming story tells of a seamstress in Charleston who embroidered exquisite wedding gowns, ironically gaining fame as a spinster who never wore one herself. Neighbours marvelled at her skill, teasing gently about her single status, yet acknowledging her indispensable role. This duality, gossip mingling with admiration, was common, revealing that social stigma wasn't merely a blunt instrument. It was nuanced, flexible, and often laced with humour. Sometimes stigma drove women to eccentricity or creative expression. A few embraced their singlehood openly, cultivating unusual hobbies, pets, or domestic arrangements that signal both independence and a refusal to conform. There's a record of a woman in Vermont who kept a rooftop garden of medicinal herbs and rare flowers, claiming it brought joy and attracted no suitors, thank goodness. These quirky anecdotes illuminate the intersection of survival, personal agency, and social expectation. Even within a society eager to judge, individual women found ways to assert character, independence, and occasionally delight. Economics and social perception were intertwined. A woman without a husband often needed to earn her own income, but work itself could be viewed skeptically. Teaching or sewing could earn you money, yes, but it also made your unmarried status visible. Here was a woman supporting herself, without male oversight, operating outside conventional domestic structures. Some neighbours might admire her thrift and competence, others might interpret her independence as immodesty or defiance. The interplay between skill, survival, and perception required constant negotiation, blending quiet courage with practical strategy. Even leisure and daily routines were coloured by stigma. Attending a dance, hosting a small tea, or walking through the market wasn't just recreation, it was a performance. You had to balance modesty with visibility, charm with propriety. A misstep could provoke gossip, while subtle gestures like offering small acts of kindness or demonstrating skillful handiwork could garner respect. The cumulative effect of these tiny social negotiations shaped every aspect of life for unmarried women, leaving them perpetually aware of both their vulnerabilities and their opportunities. Quirky anecdotes about social navigation abound. One unmarried woman kept a notebook of clever excuses for avoiding dances, from feigned headaches to exaggerated piano practice, while still maintaining her reputation. Another wore distinctive hats, claiming they distracted men from asking awkward questions, a playful subversion of social norms. These small acts of strategy remind you that life for unmarried women was part survival, part creativity, part social chess game, where wit and careful observation were as important as any legal right or financial skill. By now, as the night deepens, you can almost feel the tension and subtle triumph in these women's lives. Walking through a town square, glancing at neighbours' windows, and noting the careful performance of daily life, you sense the quiet resilience that carried them through gossip, judgment, and expectation. The stigma of spinsterhood was pervasive, but it wasn't absolute. Some women transformed judgment into opportunity, eccentricity into respect, and societal constraint into quiet independence. Tonight, as you settle into your pillow, you can imagine these women moving gracefully through a world that simultaneously constrained and depended on them, leaving traces of ingenuity, humour, and dignity in their wake. And the lives of unmarried women in the 1800s were never simple or uniform. Stigma shaped behaviour, work, and social interaction, but it also revealed the creative ways women navigated expectation. Social judgment, legal restrictions, and economic pressures intertwined, producing a life that demanded resilience, wit, and imagination. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, consider the quiet courage embedded in every daily act, every stitch, every lesson, and every carefully negotiated glance. These women weren't just surviving, they were asserting their presence in a world eager to define them otherwise, leaving subtle, enduring ripples across history. Tonight, as the room grows quiet and your fan hums softly in the background, let's wander into the family pressures and expectations that shaped the lives of unmarried women in 1800s America. Imagine yourself sitting at the edge of a small wooden bed in a modest parlour, candlelight flickering on the walls while relatives bustle around, their words carrying both concern and subtle judgment. In these years, family wasn't just a source of support, it was also the primary instrument of social regulation. Parents, siblings, and extended kin often had strong opinions about marriage, propriety, and a woman's proper place in society, and their guidance, or insistence, was rarely optional. From a young age, unmarried women were reminded that their primary path to security and social respectability was marriage. Families might encourage introductions to potential suitors at dances, church gatherings, or neighbourhood events. You can picture a mother adjusting her daughter's shawl, whispering, "He seems like a good match, don't be too proud." The subtle combination of care, instruction, and social pressure could feel suffocating even if offered with affection. Being unmarried wasn't just a personal choice, it was a source of anxiety for families, a potential reflection on their own social standing, and a problem to be solved. Siblings played a curious role too. Older brothers might treat unmarried sisters as quasi-dependents, advising them on behaviour, finances, and appearances, while sisters themselves could oscillate between empathy and gentle rivalry. Cousins too sometimes acted as informal matchmakers, spreading news of opportunities or potential suitors. These networks reinforced societal norms, but also provided subtle avenues of support. An older cousin might discreetly mentor a younger woman on running a shop, or a brother might help navigate inheritance disputes, blending familial duty with practical assistance. Yet the underlying message was clear. Your unmarried status required careful management, and the family had a stake in how you conducted yourself. Economic pressure intertwined with these familial expectations. Without a husband, a woman's financial security was often fragile. Families sometimes arranged marriages, or at least encouraged matches, based on social and economic advantage rather than affection. A marriage could secure property, business connections, or social standing. Conversely, remaining single meant families needed to consider alternative strategies, ensuring you had sufficient income, a place to live, or a respectable role in the community. Imagine a mother quietly pressing a ledger into your hands, showing how your teaching salary or sewing income might support you independently while still murmuring, "But you'd be better off with a husband." The tension between independence and family expectation was palpable. Some families became surprisingly creative in managing unmarried women. In small towns, it wasn't unusual for a relative to offer room and board in exchange for help with household chores, teaching younger children, or managing accounts. This arrangement provided both safety and purpose, though it often reinforced dependence. Other families, especially in cities, encouraged unmarried women to pursue careers in education, business, or boarding houses, subtly shifting the goal from marriage to productive social engagement. Yet even here, the shadow of expectation lingered. Independence was tolerated, even celebrated, but always framed within the family's moral and social vision. Quirky stories abound from family life during this era. One woman's parents reportedly sent her to a dance disguised in a slightly masculine coat, claiming it would teach humility and discretion, while still hoping she might meet a suitable partner. Another unmarried woman received a carefully folded note from her sister suggesting she adopt a pet cat for companionship, humorously noting that a small creature may soften your aunt's commentary on your spinsterhood. These anecdotes hint at both the pressures and the tenderness that existed side by side. Families could be strict, absurd, loving, or all three at once. Religion often amplified family expectations. Devout households emphasized marriage as a moral duty, framing a woman's unmarried status as a spiritual concern. Parents might remind daughters that God's plan for a virtuous woman included home, hearth, and spouse. Yet, paradoxically, the same religious families sometimes allowed unmarried women to take on significant community roles, like teaching Sunday school, managing charitable efforts, or assisting in church administration. Here, the overlap of family, faith, and social expectation created a world where unmarried women had responsibilities, yet were always subtly measured against marital ideals. Family pressure also shaped social behaviour. Attending dances, hosting small gatherings, or even walking in public was often framed as an opportunity to meet a suitable partner. You can imagine the careful choreography, curtsying just so, engaging in polite conversation, laughing in the correct places. Any deviation could spark subtle criticism or gossip. A cousin might comment half in jest, "Perhaps you should smile more at Mr. Jenkins," or a neighbour might wonder aloud why you didn't accept the offer of a local merchant. These micro-pressures shaped behaviour, manners, and even daily routines, embedding societal expectation deep into personal life. Scholars debate the extent to which family pressure constrained women versus providing support. Some argue that it was a form of social control, limiting autonomy and emphasising conformity. Others suggest that families were pragmatic, balancing concern, affection, and survival, creating structures that allowed unmarried women to find security, even if not complete independence. As you imagine these dynamics tonight, you can sense the subtle complexity. Family was both a net of support and a source of social surveillance, a constant reminder that independence, though possible, was never entirely free from scrutiny. Not every unmarried woman succumbed to family expectation, of course. Some pushed back gently, refusing arranged matches or insisting on earning their own living. These acts of quiet defiance could be met with frustration, admiration, or gossip, depending on the family's temperament and the community's tolerance. A few women became local legends for refusing to marry despite repeated offers, gaining reputations as clever, eccentric, or stubborn, labels that carried both admiration and mild judgment. These examples show how personal agency coexisted with familial and societal pressures, creating a delicate dance that defined much of unmarried women's lives. By now, as the night deepens and your room darkens further, you can picture the patterns of family expectation weaving through everyday life. Breakfasts with careful conversation, chores performed under watchful eyes, letters critiqued or praised, and small nudges towards social conformity. All of these shaped the rhythm of life. Yet within these routines, women found room to assert themselves, taking on jobs, cultivating hobbies, or quietly negotiating their own paths. The tension between obligation and independence was constant, a subtle hum underlying daily existence, as persistent and soft as the fan that soothes you tonight. So, as you drift further into sleep, think of these women navigating the labyrinth of family, society, and personal desire. Their lives were marked by subtle strategies, small triumphs, and moments of gentle defiance. Family pressure shaped them, constrained them, and sometimes protected them, yet it never entirely defined them. You can imagine the candlelight flickering over a ledger, the soft murmur of siblings offering advice, the quiet resilience that allowed unmarried women to survive, thrive, and occasionally flourish despite the world's constant whispers. As the soft night hum fills your room and your eyelids grow heavier, let's settle into the realities of economic vulnerability and self-reliance for unmarried women in 1800s America. Imagine yourself in a small, sparsely furnished apartment or a simple room at a boarding house, the scent of candle wax mixing with faint city smoke, pondering how you will stretch your modest earnings to cover rent, food, and occasional luxuries. Life without a husband was a constant balancing act between survival and independence. Money, after all, dictated freedom. A few dollars more could mean a month of stability or a season of hardship, and without male protection, every financial decision carried weight. Many unmarried women had to craft creative strategies for earning and conserving money. You might be teaching children by day, sewing garments by night, or tending a small garden to supplement your larder. A single dollar spent frivolously could ripple through your week, creating tiny emergencies that demanded immediate ingenuity. Some women developed systems of barter, exchanging sewing skills for meals, laundry for childcare, or tutoring for lodging. In rural areas, women might sell eggs, cheese, or woven baskets at local markets, while urban dwellers navigated bustling streets to sell services and goods, quietly negotiating both price and reputation with clients. Boarding houses were both social and economic lifelines. By renting rooms to other single women, you could stabilize your income while creating a small community of mutual aid. Picture a modest parlor where women gathered in the evening, trading tips on how to repair clothes, stretch meals, or manage debt, all while sharing stories of eccentric neighbors or odd court cases. These networks were practical and sometimes surprisingly quirky. One boarding house in Philadelphia reportedly had a resident who kept a pet parrot that squawked financial advice, amusing guests and reminding everyone of the delicate art of survival. Financial independence was often constrained by legal structures, as you learned before, and yet, paradoxically, unmarried women could sometimes leverage the very limitations imposed on them. Owning property as a feme sole allowed you to rent a room, lease farmland, or operate a small shop. Acts of entrepreneurship that were both risky and empowering. Some women became surprisingly adept negotiators, dealing with merchants, landlords, and clients with a mix of charm, precision, and quiet determination. The stories of women who successfully expanded small businesses from modest means are surprisingly common, though historians debate whether these examples were typical or exceptional. Economic vulnerability also intertwined with social perception. A woman earning her own living might be praised for thrift and industry, but she could also be judged for working outside appropriate roles or interacting too freely with men in marketplaces. Imagine walking through a busy street with your small cart of hand-sewn items, hearing whispers from neighbours who disapproved, even as a few admired your skill and initiative. Social judgment, financial necessity, and personal resourcefulness all intersected in daily life, creating a delicate dance that demanded both caution and audacity. Some women relied on extended family or distant relatives to buffer economic uncertainty, though this support was rarely unconditional. Aunts might offer lodging, cousins might advance small sums, or older siblings might help negotiate contracts. In turn, women often contributed to household work, childcare, or bookkeeping, blending dependency with practical contribution. These arrangements blurred the lines between support and obligation, creating networks that were simultaneously nurturing and demanding. You can picture evenings spent writing careful ledgers by candlelight, recording every transaction and expense, a quiet ritual of control amidst uncertainty. Odd survival strategies also emerge in historical records. One woman reportedly took in extra laundry for neighbours, strategically using the smell of fresh soap to attract more business while cultivating a reputation for reliability. Another kept a small flock of chickens on a balcony to supply eggs for both consumption and sale. These small, quirky adaptations highlight the creativity required to navigate economic vulnerability. They also remind you that self-reliance wasn't just about strict budgeting. It was about finding subtle ways to assert independence while maintaining social respectability. Scholars continue to debate the balance between vulnerability and autonomy. Some argue that the constant risk of poverty limited women's choices, forcing them into socially constrained roles that curtailed independence. Others suggest that economic necessity fostered resilience, ingenuity, and even influence, as women negotiated contracts, managed households, and earned respect in their communities. As you imagine these dynamics tonight, It's clear that survival without a husband required more than mere endurance. It demanded a keen sense of observation, careful planning, and the occasional playful strategy to navigate both money and reputation. Food and daily survival also shaped self-reliance. Cooking from scratch, stretching rations, and preserving food for winter were essential skills. A woman might supplement her income with homemade preserves, baked goods, or dairy products, turning household labour into financial resourcefulness. Meals were often modest, but meticulously managed. A small loaf of bread might be rationed over several days. Vegetables grown in a tiny garden could provide both nutrition and barter goods, and careful attention to waste ensured that every penny of effort counted. Quirky habits, like creating decorative labels for jams or hand-painting crates for produce, turned necessity into a subtle display of creativity. Urban life offered both opportunities and pressures. In cities, women could find work as seamstresses, teachers, or clerks, but competition was fierce, and wages were often precarious. Street vendors had to contend with laws, crowds, and occasionally disapproving police, all while maintaining a respectable public appearance. The need to survive economically forced ingenuity. One woman in Boston reportedly painted small trinkets at night to sell during the day, balancing artistry, commerce, and propriety. Each act was a negotiation between societal expectation, financial necessity, and personal expression. By now, as the soft night deepens and your senses tune to the hum of your surroundings, you can imagine the rhythm of survival. Waking early, working long hours, budgeting every penny, maintaining appearances and cultivating networks of support. Every day required constant attention, skill, and imagination, but these women also discovered small pleasures in their routines. A perfectly sewn seam, a small windfall from a sale, a neighbour's compliment on a tidy room, all became quiet victories, subtle affirmations of competence and independence. So tonight, as you sink further into your pillow and feel the comfort of your room, remember the delicate, intricate lives of unmarried women navigating economic vulnerability and self-reliance. They were resilient, inventive, and resourceful, blending necessity with ingenuity and transforming social constraint into subtle autonomy. Their courage and creativity echo softly across centuries, a gentle reminder that survival without conventional support can be both arduous and quietly triumphant. As you sink deeper into your pillow and the soft hum of the fan creates a gentle backdrop, let's wander into the world of boarding houses and communal living, one of the most fascinating aspects of life for unmarried women in 1800s America. Imagine stepping through the door of a modest boarding house, the faint smell of tea, coal smoke, and lavender mixing in the air, and feeling both a sense of caution and opportunity. For many women without husbands, boarding houses were more than temporary residences. They were microcosms of society, centres of mutual support, and even spaces for subtle social experimentation. Boarding houses offered a practical solution to one of the era's toughest problems: shelter. Renting an apartment independently could be prohibitively expensive, and boarding in someone else's home provided both security and companionship. You can picture the creak of wooden floorboards underfoot, small brass keys jingling, and the quiet exchange of greetings in the hallways as women settled into rooms furnished with little more than a bed, a writing desk, and a chest for clothes. These houses often became hubs for unmarried women, bringing together teachers, seamstresses, widows, and occasionally students or young professionals, all navigating the same precarious balance of independence and societal expectation. Communal living created opportunities for mutual aid. Roommates might share meals, split heating costs, or trade skills. One woman could teach piano in the parlour, while another mended garments or prepared baked goods for sale. Picture evenings spent around a small wooden table, candles flickering as advice is exchanged, stories are told, and disputes are gently mediated. These spaces cultivated resilience. No woman had to face economic or social uncertainty entirely alone, and the collective wisdom of the household often meant the difference between survival and hardship. Beyond practicality, boarding houses also offered a subtle form of social education. You observed and participated in social norms, etiquette, and negotiation, learning how to manage both finances and interpersonal relationships. A slightly older resident might mentor a younger one on navigating landlord disputes or negotiating wages for domestic work. Others might share tips for maintaining appearances at church or in the marketplace, blending survival with refinement. In this environment, independence was cultivated alongside social polish, quietly preparing women to operate autonomously in a society that often doubted their competence. Yet communal living could also be a source of tension. Imagine navigating shared hallways, competing for access to the kitchen stove, or negotiating quiet hours while balancing work and rest. Gossip was common, especially in houses filled with women of varying ages and temperaments. Stories circulate of women who meticulously catalogued the comings and goings of roommates, noting who borrowed sugar, who overstepped boundaries, or who seemed most likely to attract trouble. While these habits might seem quirky, they were practical strategies for maintaining social harmony, and perhaps a bit of quiet entertainment in otherwise regimented lives. Boarding houses often encouraged eccentricity and individuality within constraints. One woman reportedly decorated her small room with dried flowers, handwritten aphorisms, and tiny sketches she sold to neighbours. Another kept a small noisy parrot on a perch near the window, whose chatter entertained guests and reminded everyone of the delicate balance between domestic responsibility and personal flair. These little acts of creativity allowed women to assert identity in spaces shared with others, highlighting the interplay between personal expression and communal living. Urban centres were particularly conducive to this kind of arrangement. In cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, boarding houses were densely packed, offering not just shelter, but access to networks of employment and social connection. You can picture women walking together down narrow streets, sharing news of available teaching positions, newly opened shops, or the occasional social gathering. The boarding house functioned almost like a professional incubator. Connections made there could lead to teaching contracts, small business opportunities, or even assistance with property management. Independence, in these cases, was inseparable from collaboration. Historical records suggest that some boarding houses became almost legendary in their communities. One house in Charleston, for instance, was known for its quiet efficiency and gentle eccentricity, attracting unmarried women from nearby towns seeking both guidance and shelter. A few residents reportedly kept notebooks of recipes, repair tips, and local gossip, circulating them discreetly as a form of collective intelligence. The line between survival, comfort, and creativity blurred, demonstrating that communal living was not merely utilitarian. It was a space for agency, ingenuity, and social navigation. The scholarly debate surrounding boarding houses is surprisingly lively. Some historians argue that communal living reinforced dependency, limiting privacy and autonomy. Others contend that boarding houses allowed women to cultivate networks, share knowledge, and exercise financial independence in ways impossible for those confined to parental homes. As you imagine these dynamics tonight, it's clear that boarding houses were a kind of crucible, forging skills, relationships, and resilience, while simultaneously providing a safety net for women navigating an unforgiving world. Health and daily rhythms were also intertwined with communal living. Kitchens and washrooms were shared, so cleanliness and cooperation were essential. Meal planning, laundry, and heating required coordination, and women quickly learned to negotiate both shared responsibility and personal space. Evening gatherings could be lively, with music, storytelling, or informal lessons, blending utility and leisure. You can almost hear the murmur of conversation, the clatter of dishes, and the occasional laughter echoing down hallways as women shared knowledge, entertainment, and the unspoken reassurance of mutual survival. Economic opportunity often intersected with communal living. Residents sometimes pooled resources to invest in small ventures. One might buy fabric to be sewn into garments by several women, then sold for profit. Others organised small lending arrangements, covering emergencies like medical costs or delayed wages. Even in mundane transactions, splitting the cost of candles or coal, women were learning the intricacies of budgeting, negotiation, and resource allocation, all crucial for long-term self-reliance. These tiny lessons formed the backbone of economic resilience, quietly reinforcing independence under the watchful eye of societal expectation. Quirky stories continue to surface from historical records. One boarding house owner reportedly kept a ledger not just for finances, but for compliments and complaints, noting who baked the best bread, who entertained the neighbours, and who was most punctual with rent. Another resident famously painted small signs to label rooms, noting humorous titles like The Study of Quiet Resolve or Parlour of Peculiar Genius. These small touches might seem trivial, but they reveal the playful, inventive ways women created personal space, agency and identity within shared environments. By now, as you feel the soft weight of your blankets and the subtle vibration of the fan, you can picture life inside these boarding houses, the rhythm of daily chores, shared meals, whispered advice, and occasional moments of quiet triumph. Communal living was a practical solution, yes, but it was also a subtle form of social training, creativity, and resilience. Every chore, conversation, and ingenious adaptation contributed to the survival and independence of unmarried women, teaching them skills, building networks, and quietly asserting identity in a world that often sought to confine them. So tonight, as your body relaxes and your mind drifts, imagine stepping softly through these corridors, catching snippets of laughter, the smell of freshly baked bread, and the quiet hum of women navigating independence together. Boarding houses were not just shelters. They were ecosystems of survival, ingenuity, and subtle rebellion. The women within them demonstrated daily that life without a husband could be challenging, yes, but also rich with collaboration, creativity, and the quiet satisfaction of self-reliance. Let this vision linger as you drift closer to sleep. As your room grows quieter and the soft hum of the fan seems to sync with your slowing heartbeat, let's drift into the world of religious communities, a sanctuary for unmarried women in 1800s America. Imagine walking up the worn stone steps of a modest church or convent, the faint scent of beeswax candles mingling with old wood and incense, and feeling both curiosity and a subtle sense of safety. For women without husbands, religious communities often offered more than spiritual guidance. They provided shelter, social legitimacy, and a network of support that allowed independence to flourish in a society that otherwise expected female dependence. Churches and convents were some of the few places where unmarried women could assume meaningful responsibility. You might find yourself assisting in Sunday school, tending to the sick, or managing charitable efforts for the poor, all roles that conferred respect and a sense of purpose. Unlike the domestic sphere, where independence was constrained by family or societal judgment, these spaces offered structured authority. A woman could organise events, supervise younger girls, or even lead small study groups, quietly asserting competence and influence. In some cases, these positions allowed women to earn modest stipends or housing in exchange for service, blending spiritual duty with practical survival. Religious communities also offered networks of social and professional opportunity. You could meet other unmarried women, exchange advice, or learn skills that would later translate into teaching, seamstress work, or running a boarding house. Imagine sitting in a candlelit hall with peers, quietly sharing tips on financial management, sewing techniques, or local news, all while learning the expectations of propriety and decorum. These spaces nurtured both practical skills and social grace, turning spiritual engagement into a vehicle for independence and empowerment. The intersection of faith and creativity was often surprisingly playful. Some women in convents or church-based communities experimented with medicinal herbs, handcrafted devotional items, or small-scale printing, blending curiosity with practical utility. One woman reportedly crafted delicate lace bookmarks to sell in local markets, claiming they helped fund both her room and charitable activities. Another created miniature herb gardens on windowsills, blending aesthetic pleasure, self-care, and practical medicine. These quirky undertakings reflect the inventive spirit required to navigate life without a husband, finding both purpose and small joys within a structured spiritual environment. Religious affiliation also served as a shield against social criticism. A woman actively engaged in church work or charitable activity could justify her independence, demonstrating moral virtue even while unmarried. For example, a woman teaching Sunday school could subtly claim, "I am serving God's purpose," a statement that warded off the constant questioning of neighbours and family. In small towns especially, church involvement legitimised autonomy in a way that secular independence often could not. This dual role, spiritual servant and social agent, allowed unmarried women to operate in public spaces with authority while remaining within socially acceptable boundaries. Scholarly debate surrounds the true nature of this sanctuary. Some historians argue that religious communities reinforced social hierarchies and limited true autonomy, subtly constraining women within strict moral codes. Others point out that these communities provided education, networks, and even financial independence that few secular spaces offered. You can imagine the nuance. A woman might be constrained in some ways, yes, but empowered in others, navigating a careful path between service, propriety, and personal ambition. The balance was delicate, requiring both awareness and ingenuity. Health and well-being was subtly shaped by these communities. Access to spiritual guidance, modest shelter, and collective activity helped protect women from loneliness, mental strain, and some practical hazards of life alone. Imagine a small parlour where women gathered to stitch, pray, or discuss books, the quiet rhythm of hands moving across fabric or pages, creating a soothing environment. Even small rituals like communal prayers or gardening contributed to emotional and mental resilience, demonstrating that survival without a husband wasn't merely a matter of finances, it was also about community, structure, and subtle emotional support. Quirky anecdotes pepper the historical record. One woman reportedly kept a small collection of birds in her room, claiming they brought divine inspiration, while another embroidered miniature prayer books to sell discreetly, funding both personal needs and charitable projects. These eccentricities were tolerated and sometimes celebrated within religious communities, offering outlets for individuality while reinforcing social cohesion. They highlight how personal flair, even in a structured spiritual environment, could coexist with duty, decorum, and survival. Urban religious communities often functioned as informal professional networks. A woman teaching Sunday school in Philadelphia or Boston might gain introductions to families seeking private tutors, or learn about small-scale business opportunities in the local congregation. Religious affiliation provided both moral credibility and practical connections, a combination that could significantly improve an unmarried woman's chances of independence. You can almost hear the quiet shuffle of shoes across wooden floors, the low murmur of conversations, and the discreet exchange of notes offering advice or opportunity. A gentle hum of social and economic life framed by spiritual engagement. Families often encouraged women to participate in religious communities, recognizing the dual benefits of morality and support. A mother might say, "Go help in the parish, it will give you purpose," both as a safeguard against idleness and as a subtle form of reputation management. Here, independence and family expectation intersected. A woman could gain autonomy and skills while reassuring relatives of her respectability. This overlap exemplifies the complex balancing act unmarried women faced, navigating family, society, faith, and self-interest simultaneously. By now, as you feel the gentle pull of sleep approaching, imagine yourself in the quiet sanctuary of a church or convent, the faint smell of incense mingling with candle wax and old wood, surrounded by women engaged in work, prayer, or craft. These spaces offered protection, purpose, and subtle empowerment, a soft contrast to the harsher demands of urban streets, gossiping neighbours, or precarious employment. They were both literal and figurative havens where skills were cultivated, relationships nurtured, and quiet authority exercised. So tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, remember that religious communities provided more than spiritual comfort. They offered a practical, social, and even creative refuge for unmarried women. These women negotiated rules, rituals, and relationships with ingenuity and care, asserting independence in ways that were often invisible but profoundly effective. Let the gentle rhythm of their lives, their quiet resilience, and their soft acts of creativity and service settle around you like a comforting blanket, easing you toward dreams of past centuries where survival and subtle empowerment walked hand in hand. As your room grows stiller and the soft hum of the fan seems to lull the world outside into a gentle hush, let's drift into the intriguing world of women and land ownership in 1800s America. Imagine stepping onto a small plot of land, the scent of damp earth mingling with the distant smoke of a wood stove, and feeling the curious combination of possibility and restriction. For unmarried women, owning land was rare but transformative. It offered not just economic security, but a subtle form of independence that few other avenues could provide. Yet navigating property law was tricky, full of loopholes, challenges, and unexpected social consequences. In most states, unmarried women were considered feme sole, a legal category that allowed them to hold and manage property independently of male guardians. This meant you could inherit a farm, a house, or a small parcel of land from a relative and make decisions about its use, sale, or rental. Picture yourself examining a deed by candlelight, the careful penmanship revealing both opportunity and the burden of responsibility. Owning property gave you more than money. It gave authority over your daily life and the chance to influence your community through tenancy, employment, or commerce. Yet land ownership was not without its challenges. Legal disputes were common, especially if distant male relatives contested wills or argued for control over inherited property. Imagine the stress of attending a courthouse surrounded by men in formal coats, listening as lawyers debated whether you, as an unmarried woman, were competent to manage your inheritance. Some women handled these challenges with remarkable savvy, negotiating agreements, hiring trusted lawyers, and even turning inheritance disputes into social leverage. Others quietly lost out, their stories only surviving in the dusty margins of legal records. Quirky anecdotes reveal the ingenuity women employed in managing property. One woman in rural New York reportedly rented small plots of land to neighbours to grow vegetables, while she maintained her own garden, creating both income and community engagement. Another transformed her inherited farmhouse into a boarding house for travelling teachers, combining entrepreneurship with practical hospitality. These stories highlight a curious duality. Land offered security and opportunity, yet it also required creativity, negotiation, and constant vigilance to maintain both legal and social legitimacy. Scholars debate how widespread women's land ownership truly was. Some argue that it was an exceptional privilege, accessible only to women of certain social standing or fortune, while others suggest that legal loopholes and careful management made property ownership more common than previously thought. Either way, the effect on independence was tangible. Owning land allowed women to make decisions without direct oversight from a husband or male relative, and sometimes even to wield subtle influence in local commerce or social networks. You can imagine the quiet pride of women walking their land, planning crops, or arranging rentals, asserting authority in a world that often doubted their competence. Inheritance wasn't the only route to land. Some unmarried women purchased property with earnings from teaching, sewing, or small businesses. Imagine the meticulous budgeting required to save enough to buy even a modest parcel of land, balancing rent, food, and clothing, while putting aside every possible coin for a deposit. Quirky stories reveal the lengths women went to. One woman reportedly sold hand-embroidered linens door to door for years, documenting each sale in a small leather-bound notebook until she could afford a tiny lot near the outskirts of town. The combination of patience, skill, and determination reflects a quiet resilience that defined much of unmarried women's lives. Ownership also had social implications. A woman with property could rent rooms, operate a shop, or host boarders, subtly creating a role of authority within the community. Imagine sitting in a tidy parlour, negotiating rent with tenants, advising on household tasks, or sharing local news, her presence quietly shaping the rhythm of neighbourhood life. Land ownership blurred the line between domestic management and entrepreneurship, offering a socially acceptable form of independence while providing tangible economic security. Religious and community networks sometimes intersected with land management. Women who owned property often donated small portions for community gardens, church events, or charity, asserting influence and earning respect. Quirky anecdotes abound. One woman kept a small statue of an owl on her porch to mark her plot's boundaries, claiming it kept spirits honest and tenants punctual. Another crafted miniature garden beds for neighbours' children, blending generosity, aesthetic flair, and subtle social engagement. These stories highlight the imaginative ways property could become both a practical and personal canvas for women asserting autonomy. Economics and law were intertwined with daily routines. Women managing land had to balance maintenance, tenant relations, and production, often learning skills that went unacknowledged in conventional histories. Tasks included mending fences, planning crops, negotiating rentals, or even calculating taxes and fees, all while managing household chores. Imagine the rhythm of a day spent measuring plots, discussing terms with tenants, and tending both garden and ledger. Independence was tangible in these acts. Every decision reflected competence, foresight, and quiet determination, a subtle defiance of a society that expected dependence. The scholarly debate also touches on gendered perceptions of competence. Some historians argue that society frequently questioned women's ability to manage land. while others highlight examples of women whose careful stewardship gained admiration from neighbours, clergy, and even local officials. You can picture the subtle recognition: a neighbour pausing to comment on the tidiness of your garden, or a local official consulting you on rental agreements, acknowledging competence earned through diligence rather than conferred by gender. These moments of quiet authority underscore the complex interplay between law, property, and social perception. By now, as the night deepens and the fan hums steadily, imagine walking across your small plot of land at twilight, the scent of soil and evening air mixing, your hands lightly brushing over growing herbs or vegetables, your mind turning over the decisions you've made for yourself. Owning land as an unmarried woman in the 1800s was a rare but powerful statement. It was a claim to both space and self, a subtle assertion that life could be managed independently, even in a society eager to doubt competence. Each stone placed, fence mended, or tenant guided was an act of quiet autonomy. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, remember that land ownership offered more than financial security. It offered independence, influence, and the tangible satisfaction of shaping your own life. Women navigated legal hurdles, social scrutiny, and daily practicalities to claim and maintain property, demonstrating resilience, creativity, and quiet power. Imagine the candlelight flickering across a ledger, the soil warmed by evening sun, and the gentle rhythm of a day spent balancing survival and autonomy. Let this vision of women claiming space and self linger as you drift into dreams of independence quietly carved in the 19th century. As your eyes grow heavier and the gentle hum of your fan fills the room, let's wander into the role of education in the lives of unmarried women in 1800s America. Imagine yourself walking down a narrow cobblestone street toward a modest academy for girls, the scent of chalk dust and old wood mingling with the crisp morning air. Education was more than a path to a respectable occupation. It was a lifeline, a source of influence, and sometimes the only route to social and economic independence. For unmarried women, schooling was both empowerment and necessity, a way to navigate a world that offered few alternatives to marriage. Girls' academies and seminaries were expanding across the United States in the early 19th century, often run by pioneering women who believed in the value of female literacy, numeracy, and moral instruction. You might picture a sunlit classroom, rows of desks, and young women diligently copying letters or practicing arithmetic while the teacher circulates, offering guidance and encouragement. These institutions were practical and socially acceptable, providing skills directly linked to teaching careers, business ventures, or household management, while also cultivating intellectual curiosity. For unmarried women, mastery of these skills could mean the difference between financial precarity and relative security. Teaching itself became one of the most common and respected roles for unmarried women. Imagine standing before a small group of eager children, chalk in hand, your voice clear and firm, imparting knowledge while simultaneously managing classroom behaviour. Parents trusted unmarried women in these roles precisely because they were perceived as moral, disciplined, and nurturing, qualities associated with independence without the potential complications of marriage. In some urban centres, the demand for competent female teachers created steady income and social credibility, allowing unmarried women to navigate public life with confidence. Education also opened doors to less obvious forms of influence. Some women became writers, diarists, or editors of small publications, documenting daily life or offering moral guidance. You might imagine a young woman by candlelight, quill scratching across paper as she chronicles lessons taught, social observations, or personal reflections. These writings often circulated quietly, through family networks or local societies, shaping opinion and occasionally earning modest income. Quirky stories tell of women who use pseudonyms to publish poetry or advice columns, blending creativity with practicality, while maintaining respectability in a society eager to define their proper roles. Religious and moral instruction often intersected with academic training. Many schools included religious studies as a core component, reinforcing values of discipline, obedience, and community service. Yet paradoxically, this framework also gave unmarried women a socially sanctioned way to develop authority and independence. As a teacher, a woman could command respect, manage responsibilities, and interact with families and students in ways that subtly expanded her influence beyond domestic confines. The classroom became a stage where intellect, skill, and moral guidance intersected, producing quiet empowerment in socially acceptable forms. The quirky ingenuity of some women educators is especially striking. One teacher reportedly kept a small birdcage in her classroom, claiming the birds helped students learn patience and observation, while another crafted handmade maps and charts to supplement instruction, selling duplicates to neighbouring schools for extra income. These practices combined resourcefulness, creativity, and practical pedagogy, illustrating how unmarried women carved spaces for agency within otherwise restrictive societal norms. Each small innovation reflected both personal initiative and a keen understanding of community needs. Education also offered the potential for economic self-reliance. With literacy, numeracy, and social training, women could secure positions as governesses, tutors, or school teachers, often commanding better wages than less skilled labour. Imagine managing your own classroom, setting schedules, and receiving payment directly from parents or institutions, a remarkable degree of autonomy for the era. In some cases, unmarried women pooled resources to open their own small schools, combining education, income, and social networks in one endeavour. These entrepreneurial acts illustrate how education extended far beyond academic instruction, serving as a critical tool for independence. Scholars debate the extent to which education represented true liberation versus socially sanctioned limitation. Some argue that academic training reinforced gendered expectations, preparing women primarily for teaching, domestic management, or morally guided public service. Others contend that education equipped unmarried women with transferable skills, intellectual confidence, and professional networks, fostering both financial independence and subtle social influence. As you drift deeper into sleep, you can sense the nuance. Learning was both empowering and constrained, a bridge between dependence and autonomy that required careful navigation. Communal learning often fostered networks that extended beyond the classroom. Students might share lodgings, study materials, or teaching tips, creating bonds that later became sources of mutual support in employment or housing. You can picture evening study sessions, the faint scratch of pen on paper, whispers exchanged about assignments, local gossip, or job opportunities. In these intimate, slightly chaotic environments, unmarried women not only gained skills but cultivated relationships that helped sustain independence, offering subtle protection from isolation and economic vulnerability. Education also intersected with creativity and personal expression. Some women wrote diaries, crafted small illustrated books, or experimented with domestic science, blending intellectual curiosity with practical application. Quirky anecdotes reveal inventive approaches. One teacher reportedly assigned students to compose tiny handmade newspapers, while she secretly sold copies to neighbours for pocket change, blending instruction, entrepreneurship, and fun. These small acts exemplify how education could nurture imagination, skill, and financial savvy simultaneously, preparing unmarried women to navigate both personal and professional spheres. By now, as the night deepens and the fan hums softly, you can picture the quiet rhythm of life centered around learning. The smell of ink and chalk, the warmth of sunlight on worn wooden desks, the low murmur of students absorbed in work, all create a gentle, almost meditative backdrop. Education for unmarried women was more than schooling. It was a pathway to competence, social respect, and personal agency. Each lesson taught, each skill mastered, and each small creative endeavour was a step toward independence in a world that often questioned women's ability to navigate life alone. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, imagine yourself walking through sunlit classrooms, candlelit studies, and modest schoolhouses, observing women learning, teaching, and quietly asserting influence. Education provided them with tools, networks, and confidence, helping to balance independence with social expectation and economic survival with personal growth. Let the image of these industrious, thoughtful women linger as a comforting thought, a world where knowledge became both livelihood and quiet empowerment, softly echoing into your dreams. As the soft hum of your fan creates a soothing rhythm and the night drifts lazily around you, let's explore the differences between widows and lifelong singles in 1800s. America, a distinction that shaped opportunities, responsibilities, and social perception. Picture yourself sitting in a small parlour, candlelight flickering across simple furnishings, listening to the soft murmur of the world outside, and imagining how society judged women based on marital history. Widows, having once been married, occupied a distinct social category. They often commanded a degree of respect and sympathy that lifelong single women rarely received, while simultaneously facing unique challenges of their own. Widows frequently inherited property, financial assets, or household responsibilities, which gave them legal authority that unmarried women sometimes lacked. Imagine a widow managing her late husband's farm, overseeing tenants or negotiating sales, all while maintaining the household and raising children. Her experience with marriage could grant her a certain credibility in social and legal arenas. Yet this authority was tempered by societal expectations. She was expected to be modest, discreet, and in some cases prepared to remarry if convenient. The delicate balance of independence and societal pressure made widowhood a unique and often precarious position. Lifelong single women, by contrast, were rarely afforded such deference. Often labelled spinsters, they faced persistent judgment about their social status, morality, and suitability. While widows could inherit property as part of their marital experience, lifelong singles often relied on family generosity, employment, or personal ingenuity to survive. Imagine an unmarried woman managing a boarding house or teaching school, navigating economic, social, and legal obstacles without the indirect legitimacy marriage or widowhood provided. Her independence could be admired quietly, but it was rarely celebrated openly. Despite these differences, both widows and lifelong singles developed remarkable resilience. Widows, accustomed to managing households and finances, often acted as mentors to younger single women, sharing practical advice about managing money, running businesses, or negotiating social expectations. Quirky anecdotes abound. One widow in New York reportedly hosted sewing circles for single women, complete with contests for the neatest hem, offering both practical skill building and subtle social networking. Lifelong single women, in turn, sometimes embraced eccentricity, cultivating hobbies, unusual pets, or inventive domestic practices that showcased individuality and resourcefulness. Economics was a defining factor in the distinction between these groups. Widows with property or assets often had a cushion that allowed greater freedom, while lifelong singles frequently had to craft multiple income streams from teaching, sewing, or running boarding houses. Imagine juggling student lessons in the morning, sewing commissions in the afternoon, and bookkeeping or social obligations in the evening. A delicate choreography requiring both discipline and creativity. For lifelong singles, financial self-reliance was inseparable from social independence, while for widows, it could enhance an already recognised authority. Legal status played a subtle but important role. A widow's rights were shaped by inheritance law, which often allowed her control of property for life, with restrictions placed on remarriage. Some widows became quietly influential, managing businesses, renting property, or lending advice on economic matters. Lifelong single women, though technically considered independent as femmes sole, often had less social validation for their authority, requiring them to negotiate respect through competence and reputation rather than legal recognition alone. The contrast illustrates the nuanced ways society measured female capability, frequently privileging experience derived from marriage. Social perception was equally complex. Widows could command respect for their endurance and practical knowledge, while lifelong single women often face scrutiny for their deviation from expected marital paths. Yet lifelong singles sometimes cultivated social leverage in other ways, through education, professional skill, or community engagement. One eccentric story tells of a lifelong single woman in Philadelphia who became the go-to advisor for young teachers, managing both mentorship and neighborhood gossip with subtle wit. In this way, independence and social influence could coexist, even in the face of judgment. The overlap between widows and single women extended to community roles. Both groups frequently participated in church work, charitable endeavours, and teaching. A widow might lead a Sunday school or organise a parish bazaar, drawing on experience and authority, while a lifelong single woman might coordinate sewing circles, tutoring sessions, or neighbourhood care initiatives. These activities provided income, social standing, and emotional support, highlighting that women outside traditional marriage could exert influence and maintain networks critical to survival. Quirky adaptations reveal the subtle strategies these women used to assert independence. One widow reportedly kept a small rooftop garden to supplement her household income, while simultaneously providing lessons in horticulture to neighbourhood children. Another lifelong single woman created tiny hand-painted maps of her neighbourhood, selling them to boarders and travellers alike. These acts of creativity, commerce, and skill demonstrate how personal initiative intersected with survival, transforming ordinary domestic or professional spaces into sites of quiet power. Scholars debate whether widowhood or lifelong singlehood offered more autonomy. Some argue that widows enjoyed temporary privilege derived from marital experience, property rights, and societal respect, while lifelong single women often had to negotiate influence without legal or familial endorsement. Others contend that lifelong singles, unbound by remarriage obligations, could cultivate lasting independence, controlling property, income, and social networks with a consistency that widows sometimes lacked. As you settle deeper into sleep, you can sense the nuance. Both groups faced constraints, but both also demonstrated ingenuity, resilience, and subtle social negotiation. Health and daily routines were influenced by marital history as well. Widows often carried the physical and emotional labour of household management or child rearing from previous marriage, while lifelong singles were responsible for self-sufficiency and broader social networking. Imagine waking early to tend to chores, teach students, or prepare meals for boarders, each action balancing necessity and social expectation. Both groups relied on practical ingenuity, often devising creative routines to maintain well-being, sustain income, and navigate social spaces safely. By now, as the night deepens and the hum of the fan becomes a comforting lullaby, you can imagine the distinct yet overlapping lives of widows and lifelong singles. Widows wielded authority shaped by experience and legal recognition, while lifelong singles cultivated independence and subtle influence through competence, networks, and creativity. Both navigated judgment, economic necessity, and social expectation, demonstrating that female survival and agency in the 1800s were multifaceted, nuanced, and deeply resourceful. So tonight, as you drift further into dreams, picture widows managing land or households with quiet authority, and lifelong single women teaching, sewing, or running boarding houses with ingenuity and resilience. Their lives were marked by adaptation, subtle power, and creative independence. Let the image of their perseverance, cleverness, and quiet triumphs linger as a soft backdrop to your sleep, a reminder that navigating life outside conventional marriage required courage, skill, and patience across centuries. As your eyelids droop and the soft hum of your fan fills the quiet room, let's drift into the world of unmarried women in cities during the 1800s, a landscape filled with opportunity, challenge, and subtle freedoms. Picture yourself walking along cobblestone streets, past shop fronts and taverns, the smell of coal smoke and fresh bread mingling in the crisp air. Cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia offered unmarried women a life that was simultaneously constrained and unexpectedly liberating, a place where social networks, employment options, and anonymity combined to create possibilities rarely found in rural towns. Urban life presented a double-edged sword. On one hand, the density of people and diversity of professions created opportunities for work, education, and independence. You might teach at a girls' academy in the morning, tutor privately in the afternoon, and perhaps take in boarders or run a small shop in the evening. The streets themselves became a kind of social web, connecting women to employers, clients, fellow teachers, and mentors. Every encounter could be practical, offering information about available rooms, a sewing job, or a tutoring opportunity, or social, subtly reinforcing reputation, respectability, and networking potential. At the same time, anonymity in cities offered a measure of freedom from the constant scrutiny of family and neighbours. Unlike small towns, where every step was observed and every decision commented upon, city life allowed unmarried women to cultivate independence quietly. You could live alone, open a small business, or move between boarding houses without attracting undue attention. Yet freedom came with its own hazards. Crime, harassment, and exploitation were ever-present risks, and women had to remain vigilant while balancing independence with propriety. Imagine walking home after an evening tutoring session, careful to maintain both safety and social reputation, aware of the eyes observing from shop windows or alleyways. Employment opportunities in cities were broader than in rural areas, but still highly gendered. Women could find work as seamstresses, milliners, governesses, clerks, or teachers. Some joined small workshops, contributing to the booming textile and garment industries, while others capitalized on domestic skills by taking in laundry, sewing garments, or cooking for boarders. In rare cases, women operated small storefronts, selling food, crafts, or instructional materials. The urban environment rewarded skill, diligence, and networking, and women who navigated it successfully could attain a measure of economic independence that was remarkable for the time. Boarding houses and communal living were particularly important in urban centres. Imagine a modest townhouse converted into a boarding house, with a dozen women sharing rooms, kitchens, and common areas. These spaces provided security, companionship, and practical support, allowing women to pool resources, exchange advice, and trade skills. Evening gatherings might include sewing circles, shared meals, or discussions about teaching opportunities or upcoming social events. Boarding houses were both a physical and social anchor, offering a balance of independence and communal support critical to urban survival. Quirky anecdotes pepper urban life. One woman in Philadelphia reportedly kept a small rooftop garden of herbs and flowers, claiming it improved both her health and her reputation, while simultaneously selling small bouquets to neighbours. Another ran a tiny sewing business from her apartment, but added a side service of making miniature educational charts for local teachers, earning both extra income and a reputation for cleverness. These stories highlight how ingenuity and creativity were essential tools for navigating city life, blending necessity with personal expression. Cities also provided access to education, cultural events, and social networks. Libraries, lectures, and informal study groups allowed women to expand their knowledge and skills beyond what rural life typically offered. Imagine attending a public lecture on literature or science, notebook in hand, absorbing knowledge that could enhance teaching, tutoring, or social influence. Even attending church services offered networking opportunities, with women exchanging tips on employment, housing, or social etiquette. In cities, intellectual engagement and economic activity were intertwined, creating layers of autonomy unavailable elsewhere. The scholarly debate about urban independence is nuanced. Some historians argue that cities allowed unmarried women greater freedom and access to economic opportunity, while others caution that these freedoms were precarious, constrained by social expectation, legal limits, and daily risks. As you imagine city life tonight, you can sense the delicate balance. Independence came with vigilance, creativity, and careful social navigation, and each small success was hard-earned. Life outside the domestic sphere demanded both courage and ingenuity. Health and daily routines were shaped by urban living. Small apartments, shared kitchens, and bustling streets required women to develop practical skills in hygiene, meal preparation, and personal safety. Imagine carefully rationing coal for heat, balancing the preparation of meals for boarders, and walking long city blocks to deliver sewing work or tutoring lessons. Even minor daily decisions had consequences, influencing health, reputation, and finances. Survival required constant attention, foresight, and adaptability. Urban communities also allowed women to build informal support networks. Teachers might collaborate, sharing teaching materials or tips for classroom management. Seamstresses might pool resources to buy fabric wholesale or share equipment. Boarding house residents traded advice about navigating landlords, evading social scrutiny, and balancing workloads. These networks were often invisible to outsiders, yet they provided critical safety, support, and social learning, enabling women to operate independently in a bustling, sometimes hostile environment. Quirky cultural adaptations emerged in cities as well. Women sometimes hosted miniature salons or evening study groups, combining education, networking, and entertainment. One anecdote tells of a group of single women in Boston who hosted weekly penny lectures, teaching local children about history or geography while charging a nominal fee to cover materials. Another woman reportedly created small hand-drawn maps of neighbourhoods to help boarders navigate, which became a modest side income. These small acts combined entrepreneurship, creativity, and social engagement, illustrating the multi-layered strategies women employed to thrive in urban life. By now, as the night deepens and your fan hums steadily, imagine the rhythms of city life unfolding, streets lined with merchants and markets, the subtle exchanges of information and opportunity, the careful negotiation of safety and reputation, and the quiet triumphs of women asserting independence in small, meaningful ways. Urban life for unmarried women was a mix of challenge and possibility, requiring resourcefulness, courage, and social intelligence. Each small success, securing lodging, earning a steady income, or cultivating a reputation for skill and reliability, was a victory carved out amidst the complexity of city living. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture yourself walking along cobblestone streets with these women, feeling the hum of city life around you, observing classrooms, shops and boarding houses, sensing the quiet ingenuity and resilience that defined urban unmarried women. They navigated work, social expectation, and communal networks with subtle brilliance, turning constraints into opportunity and survival into quiet mastery. Let this vision linger, a comforting image of resourcefulness, creativity, and independence softly echoing across the centuries as you settle into dreams. As the soft hum of your fan fills the room and your eyelids grow heavier, let's drift into a topic that was both literal and metaphorical for unmarried women in 1800s America: health and healthcare struggles. Imagine yourself in a small, dimly lit room, the smell of candle wax mingling with the faint scent of herbs drying by the window, thinking about how fragile life could be without a husband to provide support or advocacy. Access to medical care was limited, expensive, and often shaped by social class, meaning that unmarried women had to be resourceful, resilient, and occasionally inventive in maintaining their health and the health of those around them. For many women, the local doctor was a luxury rather than a routine resource. Visits could be costly, time-consuming, or unavailable, particularly in smaller towns. You might imagine a young woman nursing a persistent cough or a sprained ankle herself, relying on home remedies passed down through family, neighbours, or local herbalists. Even minor illnesses could disrupt teaching schedules, sewing contracts, or household management, turning health issues into financial as well as physical challenges. Surviving without a husband meant learning to anticipate problems, improvise treatments, and maintain vigilance over daily habits. Herbal remedies were a cornerstone of women's self-care and practical medicine. Lavender, chamomile, and sage were common household staples, brewed into teas, poultices, or washes. Some women kept small herb gardens, cultivating thyme for digestion, mint for headaches, or yarrow for minor wounds. Quirky accounts suggest that some women added eccentric practices to their health routines. One reportedly sang to her chickens before harvesting eggs, claiming it improved both their vital spirits and her own sense of calm, while another made handwritten labels for her home remedies, giving them whimsical names like Strength in Silence or Evening Peace. These practices were a mix of practicality, superstition, and personal ritual, blending survival with creativity. Midwives and female healers played a critical role in urban and rural areas alike. Imagine calling on a local midwife not just for childbirth, but for guidance on digestive issues, fevers, or general wellness. These women often acted as informal physicians, mentors, and community connectors, offering advice and remedies that were practical, accessible, and socially acceptable. Some midwives became local legends for their skill or idiosyncrasies, blending knowledge, intuition, and social networks to care for women who had little other support. Their influence highlights the crucial intersection of gender, expertise, and community in health management. Social isolation could exacerbate health challenges. Loneliness, stress, and overwork often contributed to fatigue, poor nutrition, or depression. Imagine a woman teaching all day, sewing late into the night, managing a household or boarding house, and navigating gossip and social expectation, all while maintaining her own well-being. Without a husband to share responsibilities, or even to advocate for her in legal or social disputes, self-care became a conscious and often creative effort. Evening rituals like gentle walks, quiet sewing, or journaling by candlelight offered both physical and emotional relief. Quirky strategies emerged from historical records. One woman reportedly kept a tiny notebook of moods and remedies, noting which teas, walks, or songs improved her spirits. Another collected small stones during walks, claiming they absorbed stress and bad energy, then arranged them on her windowsill as protective charms. While these practices might seem whimsical, they reveal the deep attention unmarried women paid to managing health within limited resources, blending practical, psychological, and creative approaches to self-care. Nutrition was another crucial element. Without a husband to provide food or oversee household management, unmarried women often relied on careful budgeting, seasonal produce, and home preservation techniques. Imagine cooking a modest meal of salted meat, root vegetables, and freshly baked bread, rationing portions to last several days, while supplementing with herbs and preserved fruits. Some women exchanged preserves, baked goods, or dairy products with neighbours, creating informal barter networks that supported both nutrition and social connection. Meals were both sustenance and a subtle act of economic and social strategy. Mental health challenges were also real and pressing. Anxiety, grief, and loneliness were common companions for women navigating a world that doubted their autonomy. Writing diaries, composing letters, or participating in community and religious activities offered ways to process emotions, gain social support, and assert identity. Quirky habits, like keeping pet birds or tending elaborate windowsill gardens, often served as emotional anchors, blending care for another being with self-care. Scholars debate the effectiveness of these informal strategies, but it is clear they played a vital role in daily resilience and survival. City life intensified both opportunities and health risks. Urban pollution, dense housing, and demanding work schedules contributed to fatigue, respiratory issues, and occasional outbreaks of disease. Women had to navigate streets carefully, carry provisions, and maintain personal hygiene with limited resources. Imagine balancing a basket of sewing supplies, lesson plans, or groceries while manoeuvring past carts, crowded markets, and curious onlookers. Every step, every chore, and every precaution was a small act of vigilance, blending health, safety, and social awareness into a single rhythm of daily life. Medical debates of the time, often dominated by male physicians, sometimes dismissed women's self-care and herbal knowledge. Yet unmarried women frequently relied on intuition, observation, and generational wisdom to care for themselves and others. Some developed sophisticated systems of herbal treatments, home remedies, and preventative practices that rivaled formal medical advice in efficacy, especially when resources or access to physicians were limited. Quirky notes in diaries and letters reveal experimentation. One woman documented the effect of chamomile on sleep and creativity, while another recorded the exact ratios of herbs for fevers and digestive complaints, blending science, observation, and tradition. By now, as the night deepens and the soft hum of the fan blends with the distant sounds of the world outside, you can imagine the careful rhythms of self-care and health maintenance in the lives of unmarried women. Balancing work, household chores, and social expectations while nurturing one's body and mind was a daily challenge, requiring both practical skill and personal creativity. The quiet attention to wellness, the inventive remedies, and the subtle rituals reflect the ingenuity and resilience necessary to survive in a society that offered little direct support. So tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, picture women tending small gardens, preparing herbal remedies, maintaining quiet routines, and finding solace in writing, pets, or communal activities. Health and survival were inseparable, each action a subtle assertion of independence and care, in a world that often demanded both resilience and discretion. Let these images of self-reliance, resourcefulness, and quiet ingenuity linger softly as you move toward dreams, a comforting echo of the strength and creativity women cultivated while navigating life without a husband. As the gentle hum of your fan fills the quiet room and your body sinks deeper into your pillow, let's explore the more quirky survival methods that unmarried women in 1800s America sometimes developed. Picture yourself in a modest kitchen or small parlour, surrounded by baskets of herbs, sewing supplies, or notebooks filled with observations, as you imagine the ingenious ways women kept themselves afloat, financially, socially, and even emotionally. Necessity, creativity, and sometimes a touch of eccentricity combined to produce practices that were as practical as they were unusual, revealing the resilience and inventiveness required to navigate life without a husband. One of the most common quirky methods involved domestic ingenuity. Women often transformed small spaces into multifunctional workshops, blending household chores with income-generating projects. You can picture a tiny room filled with sewing machines, bolts of fabric, or baskets of hand-stitched goods ready for sale. One woman in Boston reportedly created elaborate doll clothing for local children, a niche that proved both profitable and socially acceptable, while also allowing her to exercise a playful creativity often absent from more formal work. Similarly, some women produced homemade candles, soap, or preserves turning everyday tasks into both craft and commerce. Herbalism and home medicine were not just about survival. They could be highly inventive and at times whimsical. Imagine a woman carefully drying chamomile, sage, or lavender on her windowsill while keeping meticulous notes on their effects. One woman reportedly brewed teas in different combinations depending on the day of the week, claiming certain blends improved mental clarity for teaching and others enhanced peace of mind for household management. Another kept tiny vials of tinctures labelled with imaginative names like Evening Calm or Sunrise Strength, offering remedies to neighbours while maintaining an air of charming eccentricity. These methods were practical, socially acceptable, and personally expressive, a subtle form of autonomy intertwined with necessity. Entrepreneurship sometimes took unexpectedly clever forms. One woman documented in historical accounts sold small hand-painted maps of her town to travellers, supplementing her modest teaching income. Another ran a microlending system among women in her boarding house, offering small amounts of money in exchange for repayment with baked goods or sewing services. In urban centres, women creatively navigated the labour market. A sewing teacher might offer embroidery lessons during the day, produce custom garments for local families in the afternoon, and even sell decorated household items on weekends. Each small venture required planning, observation, and social finesse, turning everyday skills into survival tools. Quirky social strategies also emerged as women navigated propriety and reputation. Imagine using subtle gestures, humour, or clever notes to maintain respectability while securing independence. One woman reportedly left tiny anonymous notes with advice for neighbours, earning her the affectionate nickname the Gentle Advisor. Another used playful signage outside her boarding house to signal availability of rooms or services without attracting unwanted scrutiny, blending marketing savvy with decorum. These strategies reveal how unmarried women could assert influence and independence while operating under the constraints of social expectation, marrying resourcefulness with subtle creativity. In rural areas, resourcefulness often involved barter and ingenuity with the land. Imagine a woman trading eggs, herbs, or hand-sewn goods for other necessities, building networks of mutual support across a small community. One eccentric story tells of a woman who trained her chickens to deliver small packages of herbs to neighbours, creating both efficiency and amusement while reinforcing her presence in local social networks. Such practices demonstrate how practicality, creativity, and social engagement intersected, turning small innovations into both survival strategies and social currency. Mental and emotional survival often intertwined with these quirky practices. Diaries, journals, and letters reveal women who developed imaginative routines to sustain morale and mental sharpness. One woman reportedly kept a notebook of daily curiosities, listing plants, birds, and observations of neighbours' gardens as a way to feel connected to the world while alone. Another created small artistic projects, miniature paintings, sewn gifts, or decorative household items that combined productivity with personal fulfillment. These practices weren't frivolous. They supported mental health, reinforced identity, and occasionally provided modest financial gain. Education and teaching often incorporated inventive approaches. A few women created informal evening schools, tutoring small groups of children or adults for a modest fee while cultivating networks of reputation and respectability. One account describes a woman using homemade visual aids, hand-painted charts, and playful exercises to teach reading and arithmetic, earning local praise and repeat clients. Another blended sewing instruction with moral guidance, providing both practical skills and socially approved education. In these creative intersections of teaching, craft, and survival, unmarried women demonstrated ingenuity that went beyond mere survival. It was resourcefulness married to strategy and social awareness. Religious and community involvement also inspired quirky methods of self-reliance. Women in church networks sometimes organised craft fairs, charity sales, or cooperative projects that offered both income and social validation. Imagine coordinating a small fair where embroidered linens, homemade preserves, and handcrafted toys were sold to neighbours, proceeds divided among participants. Some women added playful or creative touches, tiny decorative labels, miniature handbills, or personalised packaging that became a signature of quality and ingenuity. These strategies combined resourcefulness, social savvy, and creativity, enhancing both reputation and economic stability. Scholars debate how widespread these inventive survival strategies truly were. Some argue that they were the domain of exceptional women, outliers with particular skill or audacity. Others suggest that such ingenuity was common, reflecting a broader pattern of adaptation among unmarried women navigating limited economic, social and legal opportunities. Either way, the stories reveal a critical truth. Independence required creativity, risk management and strategic thinking. Every small invention, quirky practice or inventive work arrangement was both a survival strategy and a subtle assertion of autonomy in a world that often doubted women's competence. By now, as your eyelids grow heavier and the room feels warmer and more comforting, imagine the quiet rhythm of these inventive lives. Herbs drying by the window, sewing needles clicking softly, small notebooks filled with observations, miniature gardens tended, and subtle entrepreneurial ventures humming along. Independence, resourcefulness, and creativity intertwined seamlessly, turning ordinary domestic spaces into arenas of survival, influence, and personal expression. The combination of practical necessity and whimsy demonstrates the resilience, cleverness, and quiet humour that characterised unmarried women's lives in this era. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture these women navigating life with a blend of diligence, creativity, and gentle eccentricity. They transformed chores into income, routine into ritual, and modest skills into economic and social leverage. Let the image of their inventive survival linger softly in your mind, a comforting reminder that independence was often forged in the small, quiet, and delightfully unusual practices of daily life. As your eyes begin to grow heavy and the gentle hum of your fan fills the room, let's explore a question that historians still debate today. Were unmarried women in 1800s America oppressed or pioneering? Picture yourself sitting in a quiet parlour, candlelight flickering against the walls, considering a woman without a husband as she navigates her small world, her home, workplace, church, or boarding house, balancing independence, survival, and social expectation. Scholars have long argued over whether these women were trapped by societal constraints or quietly pushing boundaries, and as you drift towards sleep, you can gently contemplate both perspectives. On one hand, life for unmarried women was undeniably constrained. Laws, social norms, and economic limitations created obstacles that could feel suffocating. Imagine trying to rent a room or obtain a loan, only to be questioned about your competence simply because you lacked a husband. Imagine gossip at church, sideways glances from neighbours, or subtle admonitions from relatives about why you hadn't married yet. Many women depended on family, religious networks, or community goodwill just to survive, navigating systems designed to favour men and married women. In this sense, historians argue single women were living under layers of social, legal, and economic oppression. Yet, paradoxically, these very constraints also created opportunities for ingenuity and quiet independence. Without a husband, a woman could make decisions about her property, her work and her daily routines, sometimes exercising authority unavailable to married peers. Imagine a teacher setting her own schedule, a seamstress negotiating prices with clients, or a woman managing her own boarding house. In these small acts, autonomy and resourcefulness blossomed. Some women used legal loopholes, property ownership, or social networks to cultivate financial independence, becoming quietly influential within their communities. The debate is whether these acts were exceptional or emblematic of broader possibilities for single women of the era. Quirky anecdotes illuminate the pioneering side of unmarried life. One woman reportedly transformed her modest apartment into a combined teaching studio and embroidery workshop, taking on apprentices, selling hand-stitched items and mentoring younger women, all without direct male oversight. Another created a small urban garden, growing herbs and vegetables that she sold or bartered for goods and services, blending practical ingenuity with economic independence. These creative solutions highlight how women carved spaces of autonomy, even within a society structured to limit their freedom. Survival became a subtle form of rebellion, and everyday routines became exercises in resourcefulness. Social engagement was another arena for both constraint and innovation. A woman might participate in church charities, teach Sunday school, or run informal evening classes, all of which bolstered respectability while also offering practical influence. Imagine quietly organising neighbourhood initiatives, advising younger women, or managing modest funds. all subtle acts of leadership conducted under the watchful eyes of society. These forms of agency were often invisible to outsiders, yet they allowed unmarried women to build networks, earn income, and shape their communities in meaningful ways. Scholars note that such engagement sometimes went unrecognised precisely because it did not challenge the public order overtly. Economics remained a constant lens through which independence and oppression were measured. Women had to manage budgets, find employment, or create small enterprises to support themselves. Some became adept at juggling multiple income streams, teaching, sewing, boarding house management, or craft sales, while maintaining social respectability. The challenge was subtle. Success required constant observation of social norms, meticulous planning, and occasionally the courage to defy expectations. The act of balancing financial survival with societal propriety itself became a demonstration of quiet power, an assertion of capability within the bounds of cultural limits. Health and personal care also reflected both constraint and autonomy. Without a husband to advocate for their medical care or manage household labour, women relied on herbal remedies, community knowledge, and inventive routines. You might picture a woman tending a small rooftop herb garden, brewing teas for herself and neighbours, or recording observations in a leather-bound notebook. Quirky personal rituals, like arranging stones to mark garden plots or giving whimsical names to remedies, blended practicality with creativity, highlighting the subtle ways women claimed agency over their daily lives. Even mundane chores became acts of mastery over circumstance. The debate among historians often hinges on interpretation of these everyday acts. Were unmarried women oppressed because they navigated a constrained legal and social system? Or were they pioneering because they found ways to exercise autonomy, creativity, and influence despite those constraints? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Oppression existed, certainly, but it coexisted with opportunities for resourcefulness, social negotiation, and personal empowerment. As you drift closer to sleep tonight, you can gently hold both realities in your mind, appreciating the tension, resilience, and nuance of life without a husband in the 1800s. Education was a central arena where independence and pioneering spirit flourished. Single women who pursued schooling, teaching, or intellectual engagement accessed opportunities that married women often could not. Picture a woman in a small academy, instructing students, mentoring younger teachers, and negotiating pay, all while managing a personal household. Her life was constrained by societal norms, yet she exercised authority, creativity, and influence. This duality reflects the broader pattern of unmarried women, constrained in some ways, empowered in others, quietly redefining what female agency could look like in daily life. Community and family networks provided both support and subtle limitation. Families often encouraged work, education, or church involvement as acceptable paths for single women, framing independence as a socially sanctioned exception rather than a challenge to norms. Relatives might provide lodging, advice, or introductions to potential employment, but always within a framework that reinforced propriety and monitored behaviour. Even in these arrangements, unmarried women exercised negotiation skills, creativity, and strategic thinking. Every act of survival, from budgeting to mentoring to negotiating contracts, became a quiet assertion of self within a web of expectation. Quirky survival strategies again reveal the pioneering aspects of unmarried women's lives. One woman in New York reportedly used tiny painted signs in her boarding house to indicate available rooms, subtly asserting control and professionalism while maintaining propriety. Another used homemade visual aids to enhance her teaching, simultaneously improving instruction and attracting paying students. These small, inventive acts were emblematic of broader patterns. Women found subtle ways to innovate, influence, and thrive even when overt independence was discouraged. Creativity became a tool of survival and quiet defiance. By now, as your mind relaxes and the fan hums softly, imagine the lives of these women in gentle relief, navigating laws, social norms, and family expectations while quietly asserting autonomy through work, education, community involvement, and personal ingenuity. Life without a husband could be restrictive, yes, but it was also a laboratory for resourcefulness, creativity, and subtle empowerment. Each stitch sewn, lesson taught, or small business managed was both a practical necessity and an act of quiet agency. So tonight, as you drift further towards sleep, let the tension between oppression and pioneering life settle softly in your mind. Picture women balancing constraint and creativity, expectation and self-determination, crafting lives that were resourceful, intelligent, and quietly assertive. Let their ingenuity, resilience, and subtle acts of agency wrap around you like a comforting blanket, a gentle reminder that even within limits, independence and personal mastery could thrive. As the gentle hum of your fan fills the room and the soft shadows of the night stretch across your walls, let's drift into the way marriage functioned as financial security for women in 1800s America, a reality that profoundly shaped the lives of those who remained single. Imagine yourself walking along a quiet street at twilight, lanterns casting long, flickering shadows, contemplating how a contract as simple as a wedding vow could determine a woman's economic fate. For most women, marrying was not just a personal or emotional choice. It was a survival strategy, a hedge against poverty, legal vulnerability, and social scrutiny. The landscape for women without husbands was precarious, making self-reliance both challenging and essential. Marriage offered legal and financial protections that unmarried women could rarely access. Upon marriage, a woman's legal identity often merged with her husband's, granting her indirect access to property, credit, and household resources. Imagine a young woman whose father could only provide a small inheritance. By marrying a man with property or steady income, she could secure a home, financial stability, and social legitimacy. Scholars argue that this necessity shaped not just personal lives but entire communities, where women's employment, education, and mobility were often calculated against the backdrop of marital prospects. Yet marriage came with costs beyond personal autonomy. A husband's control over property and income limited women's legal agency, and wives were often expected to subsume their careers or ambitions under household management. Imagine being an accomplished seamstress or teacher, suddenly obliged to prioritise domestic chores or childcare over personal projects. The tension between financial security and personal independence defined the choices women faced, and for many, the decision to marry involved careful calculation rather than romantic impulse. Financial necessity could push women toward unions that were convenient or strategically advantageous but not always personally fulfilling. Unmarried women, on the other hand, had to navigate life without these legal and economic protections. Imagine managing rent, food, and bills entirely on your own, negotiating work opportunities, or maintaining a small boarding house while balancing social expectations and personal safety. For some, the prospect of marriage was a distant fallback. For others, it was deliberately avoided, either due to preference, incompatibility, or the desire for independence. Their survival often depended on ingenuity, social networks, and practical resourcefulness, blending work, education, and community engagement into a delicate daily balancing act. Quirky strategies highlight the creative ways women navigated the tension between marriage and financial autonomy. One woman reportedly cultivated a small rooftop garden to supplement her modest income, simultaneously signalling that she could manage a household independently while remaining respectable enough to be considered a suitable match. Another developed an informal tutoring network, exchanging lessons with boarders in her home, allowing her to sustain financial independence without relying on a husband. These practices demonstrate a mix of practicality, subtle social signalling, and entrepreneurial creativity. Family often played a decisive role in shaping marriage as financial security. Parents sometimes orchestrated introductions, offered dowries, or provided advice designed to enhance a daughter's prospects. Imagine receiving a carefully folded note from a mother or aunt. Mr. Andrews is a reliable match. He can provide a home and steady income. Families framed marriage as both economic strategy and social duty, subtly shaping women's choices while reinforcing norms about dependence, propriety, and social stability. In some cases, this pressure could feel oppressive, yet it also reflected the harsh realities of survival in a world where financial security for women was rarely independent of men. Religious and moral frameworks reinforced the economic logic of marriage. Sermons, conduct books, and advice manuals often emphasized the stability and virtue provided by union, framing singlehood as risky, socially marginal, or spiritually incomplete. Imagine a young woman attending a Sunday service where the minister extols the virtues of married life, not merely for companionship, but as a bulwark against poverty and moral danger. In this context, marriage was not solely an emotional decision, it was a practical, socially mandated strategy for navigating vulnerability and risk. Yet some women consciously resisted marriage despite these pressures, choosing instead to cultivate financial and social independence. Scholars debate the motivations of lifelong single women. Were they resisting social norms for ideological reasons, or were they navigating economic necessity, personal ambition, or simply circumstances beyond their control? Quirky anecdotes abound. One woman reportedly refused multiple suitors, claiming she preferred quiet evenings with books and embroidery over domestic management, while another managed a small business that provided her income, lodging, and social standing without a husband. These examples underscore the subtle but significant autonomy unmarried women could exercise, even within a system that framed marriage as essential. Urban life amplified both the advantages and disadvantages of marriage. Cities offered work, education, and social networks, providing unmarried women with alternatives to relying on husbands for financial security. Imagine a young woman running a boarding house in Boston, teaching children in the mornings and selling sewn goods in the evenings, quietly building a life of autonomy. At the same time, city life exposed women to social scrutiny and economic competition, reinforcing the subtle tension between independence and the social safety net offered by marriage. Every decision required careful negotiation of risk, reputation, and opportunity. Quirky adaptations often emerged at the intersection of survival and social expectation. A woman might host informal classes for children in her boarding house, subtly signalling competence and respectability while generating income. Another might create decorative household items or sell small crafts in the local market, blending entrepreneurship with social propriety. These inventive practices allowed unmarried women to maintain both financial security and personal dignity, while demonstrating skill, resourcefulness, and subtle influence in a society that often measured their worth by marital status. The scholarly debate continues over how essential marriage truly was for survival. Some argue that women without husbands were structurally disadvantaged, facing daily vulnerability in employment, housing, and social perception. Others contend that resourceful women found pathways to independence, leveraging skill, education, and social networks to secure financial and social stability. As you drift further into sleep, you can hold both perspectives gently in your mind. Marriage was often a practical tool for survival, yet independence was possible through careful planning, ingenuity, and quiet perseverance. By now, as the night deepens and your surroundings settle into stillness, imagine women balancing the practical benefits of marriage against the allure of autonomy. Some accepted union for protection and stability, others resisted, crafting self-reliance through education, work, and creativity. Every action, whether marrying strategically, running a boarding house, or teaching, was a calculated negotiation between social expectation and personal agency. In this tension, women carved spaces of independence, subtle influence, and quiet mastery, demonstrating resilience across the challenges of the 19th century. So tonight, as you drift further into dreams, picture unmarried women weighing marriage as financial security against the pursuit of independence, navigating subtle pressures, opportunities, and risks with quiet intelligence and ingenuity. Let the rhythm of their resourcefulness, resilience, and strategic thinking settle softly in your mind, a comforting reminder that even within constraints, women in the 1800s found ways to assert agency, creativity, and quiet control over their lives. As the gentle hum of your fan blends with the quiet of the night and your eyes grow heavier, let's wander westward and explore the lives of unmarried women on the frontier in 1800s America. Imagine yourself stepping off a dusty trail, the scent of pine, earth, and distant smoke filling the air, feeling both awe and apprehension. Life on the frontier was radically different from that in cities or established towns. Survival required grit, ingenuity, and adaptability, and unmarried women had to navigate physical, social, and economic challenges without the conventional protections of marriage. Here, independence was often imposed by circumstance rather than choice, and every day demanded resilience, creativity, and courage. The frontier offered both opportunity and vulnerability. Unlike urban centres, where employment and social networks were somewhat established, life in newly settled territories meant that women often had to perform multiple roles simultaneously, tending to crops, managing livestock, preparing meals, caring for neighbours or relatives, and sometimes running small businesses. Imagine waking before dawn, stoking a wood stove, milking cows, fetching water, and organising your household before attending to teaching or sewing work. Survival was not optional, and every skill, from carpentry to bookkeeping to herb law, was valuable. Isolation was a defining feature of frontier life. Without immediate family or established social networks, unmarried women often relied on distant neighbours, travelling teachers, or church communities for guidance, support, and companionship. Picture a small cabin surrounded by dense woods, smoke curling from the chimney, with a few scattered neighbours exchanging news, resources, or advice. Loneliness could be profound, and coping strategies range from cultivating domestic hobbies and gardens to keeping small pets or journals. Quirky anecdotes highlight resilience. One woman reportedly kept a flock of chickens not only for eggs, but as companions, while another catalogued local flora and fauna to pass the long winter evenings and supplement her teaching. Economic self-reliance was often unavoidable. Unmarried women on the frontier might teach local children, sew or mend clothing for neighbours, or manage small shops or boarding spaces. You can imagine travelling several miles on horseback or on foot to deliver sewn garments, trade eggs and milk, or tutor children, each task a delicate negotiation of energy, resources, and reputation. Some women became central figures in local commerce, respected for their skill, reliability, and knowledge of the land, quietly asserting authority in communities that had few established hierarchies. Land ownership and property management were especially significant. Some unmarried women inherited or purchased parcels, managing crops, livestock, and even small trade networks. One documented case tells of a woman who leased land to neighbours while maintaining her own productive garden, simultaneously ensuring income and food security. Property ownership on the frontier not only provided economic stability, but also a degree of social standing, signalling competence and independence in a community where survival and reputation were closely intertwined. Quirky frontier adaptations abound. One woman reportedly painted her cabin doors in bright colours to signal availability for tutoring or room rentals, while another used handmade signs to direct travellers to her garden or boarding space. Another frontier woman created small herbal remedies using local plants, blending practical medicine with small-scale commerce, while cultivating an air of curiosity and respectability in her isolated community. These inventive practices allowed unmarried women to survive, thrive, and maintain influence despite geographic and social isolation. Health and physical challenges were constant. Frontier women contended with harsh winters, limited medical care, and physically demanding chores. Imagine hauling water, chopping firewood, and tending animals while managing your own household and any economic ventures. Herbal knowledge, practical remedies, and careful observation became essential skills, as access to doctors was limited and travel to town could take days. Quirky strategies such as creating homemade poultices, drying herbs for tea, or carefully rationing food were both practical and inventive, reflecting the dual need for resourcefulness and resilience. Community involvement was a subtle but crucial source of support. Church gatherings, social visits, and barter networks allowed women to exchange goods, advice, and companionship. One eccentric story tells of a frontier woman who hosted small reading circles in her cabin, teaching children and adults alike while exchanging baked goods or sewn items for materials and services. These gatherings fostered both social cohesion and economic opportunity, demonstrating how unmarried women could create influence and autonomy, even in remote, isolated settings. Scholars debate the degree of independence available to unmarried women on the frontier. Some argue that geographic isolation forced women into roles that granted unprecedented autonomy, from managing property to teaching, tending gardens, and negotiating business transactions. Others caution that this freedom was often imposed by necessity, with high stakes and constant risk, leaving women vulnerable to environmental, economic, and social pressures. As you drift closer to sleep tonight, you can sense the delicate balance. Independence often coincided with labour, risk, and constant vigilance, making autonomy both empowering and demanding. Education and skill building were critical in this context. Women who could read, write, and manage accounts gained advantages, whether running a school, tutoring neighbours, or keeping detailed records of transactions. Imagine a woman documenting crop yields, rental agreements, or lesson plans in a small notebook, each page reflecting careful observation, diligence, and planning. Literacy and numeracy were not just intellectual pursuits, they were survival tools, enabling women to maintain autonomy, assert authority, and manage daily life efficiently in the absence of a husband or other adult male authority. Frontier women often developed inventive routines to manage multiple responsibilities. One woman reportedly scheduled teaching, sewing, and household chores around sunrise and sunset, creating a rhythm that balanced labour, rest, and social engagement. Another kept small, companion animals that provided comfort, practical assistance, or even alarm systems for approaching strangers. These quirky practices reflect the intersection of ingenuity, necessity, and psychological resilience, transforming the monotony and risk of frontier life into structured, manageable, and even meaningful routines. By now, as the night deepens and your body relaxes, imagine life on the frontier in vivid detail. Cabins tucked into forests, gardens carefully tended, livestock managed with skill and patience, small boarding arrangements maintained with precision, and women teaching, crafting, and tending households with quiet determination. Life without a husband was often harsh and demanding, yet it cultivated ingenuity, independence, and subtle influence in ways unique to the frontier. Every chore, lesson, and creative solution reflected resilience and quiet agency, demonstrating the capacity of women to thrive despite isolation and risk. So tonight, as you drift closer to dreams, picture unmarried women navigating the frontier with courage, skill, and cleverness. They cultivated land, taught children, traded goods, and managed households, turning geographic isolation into opportunities for autonomy, creativity, and influence. Let the vision of their quiet resilience linger as a comforting presence in your mind, a gentle reminder that independence, ingenuity, and survival can coexist even in the most challenging circumstances. As your body sinks deeper into your pillow and the fan hums a soothing rhythm, let's drift into the world of social clubs and female networks in the 1800s, where unmarried women often discovered unexpected community and influence. Imagine stepping into a cozy parlour, the faint scent of tea and fresh candles mixing with worn books, and the gentle murmur of conversation, where women gather not just to pass time, but to share knowledge, resources, and support. These networks, sometimes informal sewing circles, literary clubs, or charitable societies, became vital arenas for survival, camaraderie, and subtle empowerment in a society that often measured a woman's worth by marital status. In urban centres especially, social clubs offered opportunities for economic, intellectual, and emotional engagement. Imagine a weekly gathering in a small Boston parlour, where women exchanged sewing tips, lesson plans for their pupils, or strategies for negotiating wages. Here, advice circulates like currency: how to stretch a week's income, attract more students, or manage a boarding house efficiently. Some clubs were explicitly charitable, organising bazaars or fundraising events that allowed women to contribute meaningfully to their communities while cultivating social legitimacy. These gatherings provided both practical survival tools and a sense of belonging, counterbalancing isolation or societal judgment. Quirky stories abound in these circles. One literary society reportedly encouraged members to create miniature hand-bound books, which they circulated or sold discreetly to neighbours, blending craft, entrepreneurship, and social bonding. Another sewing circle developed a playful competitive element, awarding small prizes for the neatest hems or most creative embroidery, turning domestic labour into a source of prestige and fun. These practices highlight how unmarried women carved spaces for creativity, networking, and personal satisfaction, transforming what could have been mundane survival tasks into opportunities for social influence and connection. Education and self-improvement were central to many of these networks. Some clubs organised informal lectures, debates, or reading groups, allowing women to explore literature, science, or current events. Imagine a woman quietly absorbing a discussion about civic issues or a new pedagogical method, while also exchanging teaching tips with peers. These spaces enabled intellectual growth in socially acceptable settings, reinforcing both competence and reputation. They were often disguised as leisure or charity, but in practice they expanded women's influence and knowledge in ways that could ripple through their communities. Economic networking was another critical function. Women who participated in clubs often traded resources, collaborated on income-generating projects, or pooled money for communal ventures. For instance, one group of unmarried women reportedly funded a shared printing press to produce lesson materials and small local publications, creating both income and professional visibility. Another coordinated sewing orders for local families, dividing work according to skill and availability while maintaining quality and efficiency. These cooperative ventures highlight the ingenuity, organisational skill, and subtle leadership unmarried women cultivated in social networks, reinforcing both survival and autonomy. Religious or charitable societies often intersected with these networks, enhancing respectability while providing practical benefits. Imagine coordinating a charity fair with a group of women, collecting donations, crafting goods, and managing logistics, all while cultivating reputations for industriousness, skill, and social grace. These activities allowed unmarried women to operate in public spaces with authority, subtly asserting competence and influence in a manner deemed socially acceptable. In many cases, the lines between charity, work, and social networking blurred, creating a fertile space for resourcefulness and subtle empowerment. Quirky adaptations and traditions developed within these networks. One society reportedly held mystery exchanges, where women anonymously traded small handcrafted items, combining playfulness, skill, and social engagement. Another group kept meticulous records of who had contributed labour or materials for charitable projects, rewarding effort with handwritten certificates of appreciation. These small rituals fostered cohesion, reinforced respectability, and provided informal recognition, allowing unmarried women to establish authority and influence while navigating the constraints of propriety. The scholarly debate centres on whether these networks functioned primarily as survival mechanisms or avenues of empowerment. Some argue that social clubs merely helped unmarried women cope with isolation and economic insecurity, providing temporary support within a restrictive social structure. Others contend that these networks offered genuine opportunities for leadership, creativity, and influence, enabling women to cultivate skills, manage resources, and assert subtle authority in ways often invisible to mainstream historical narratives. You can sense the nuance as you imagine these gatherings. Survival and empowerment intertwined, practical skill mingling with social finesse. Rural communities had analogous networks, though they were often smaller and less formal. Sewing bees, quilting circles, and church-related groups connected women across farms and small towns, allowing knowledge, labour, and goods to circulate efficiently. Imagine a woman travelling a few miles to join a neighbour's quilting circle, exchanging not just stitches but advice, recipes, herbal remedies, and occasionally gossip. These small interactions reinforce social cohesion while providing practical benefits for survival, demonstrating that networks were as critical in rural areas as in cities, even when spaces were informal and limited. Even seemingly minor acts within these networks could have lasting impact. Mentoring younger women, sharing tools or resources, or organising cooperative work provided both immediate support and long-term social capital. One anecdote tells of a woman who hosted weekly reading sessions for local girls, creating a quiet legacy that later enabled some participants to teach, run small businesses, or manage households independently. These subtle threads of mentorship, resource sharing, and social organisation reveal how unmarried women turned collaboration into resilience, skill building, and influence, often without attracting overt attention from male-dominated society. By now, as the night deepens and your body relaxes, imagine these networks in motion. Women passing patterns and recipes, exchanging teaching notes, sharing laughter, trading small handcrafts, and quietly asserting authority through skill, organisation, and social acumen. Independence, influence, and community existed in subtle but powerful ways, demonstrating that unmarried women were not simply surviving, they were creating systems, connections, and spaces of agency within a society that often underestimated them. Each gathering, lesson, or craft project was both practical and empowering, a soft but persistent assertion of competence and resilience. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture these women gathered in parlours, church halls, or modest homes, exchanging knowledge, skills, and friendship. Let their subtle ingenuity, cooperation, and quiet leadership linger in your mind, a comforting reminder that even within societal constraints, unmarried women cultivated agency, influence, and resourcefulness. Their networks were microcosms of resilience and creativity, proving that collaboration and community could transform survival into quiet mastery. As the soft hum of your fan lulls the room into stillness, and your eyelids grow heavier, let's focus tonight on workplace discrimination and resilience for unmarried women in 1800s America. Picture yourself stepping into a bustling workshop, classroom or boarding house, the scent of coal smoke, fresh bread, and ink mingling in the air, and imagine the subtle challenges women faced every day. Being unmarried in a society that assumed dependence on a husband meant that professional life was often riddled with skepticism, lower pay, and social judgment, but it also offered opportunities to cultivate resilience, creativity, and influence in ways that were both practical and quietly empowering. Employment opportunities for unmarried women were expanding, yet limitations persisted. Teaching, sewing, domestic service, and small-scale commerce were socially acceptable, but pay was often lower than men's, and advancement could be curtailed by gendered expectations. Imagine standing in a classroom, managing 30 students, while a male counterpart in the same town earned significantly more for the same hours. Or envision delivering sewn garments door to door, navigating skepticism from clients who assumed unmarried women lacked skill or authority. These subtle forms of workplace discrimination were pervasive, shaping daily routines and influencing social standing. Yet women responded with ingenuity and quiet resistance. One urban seamstress reportedly negotiated contracts for her embroidery by offering custom designs and guaranteed timeliness, effectively demonstrating competence that superseded gendered skepticism. Another teacher supplemented her salary by privately tutoring children in Latin and arithmetic, leveraging her skill set while maintaining social respectability. These strategies reflect a combination of resilience, resourcefulness, and social savvy, allowing women to assert authority in professional spaces that often sought to diminish them. Workplace resilience often intersected with social networks. Imagine exchanging tips with other women at church gatherings or sewing circles, learning which employers were reliable, how to negotiate better pay, or where to find consistent clients. Some women formed informal guilds or cooperative ventures, pooling labour and resources to strengthen bargaining power. One quirky account tells of a group of unmarried women who collectively managed a small textile operation, dividing tasks based on skill, sharing profits, and using creative labels for their work that subtly signalled professionalism. These networks created safety nets and empowered women to navigate both labour and social expectations simultaneously. Discrimination could be subtle as well as overt. Employers and clients often assumed that unmarried women were less competent, less authoritative, or morally suspect. A teacher might be challenged by parents who doubted her discipline, while a seamstress might be patronised for negotiating prices. In some cases, male colleagues or supervisors resisted women's authority outright, limiting opportunities for advancement or recognition. Yet the very act of performing work competently and persisting despite skepticism was a demonstration of quiet rebellion, skill, and autonomy. Every lesson taught, garment finished, or room managed became a subtle assertion of professional legitimacy. Quirky survival strategies occasionally emerged as clever responses to these challenges. One woman reportedly kept a ledger of compliments from clients, displaying it discreetly to reinforce her reputation for skill and reliability. Another used small decorative flourishes in sewn garments to distinguish her work, building a recognizable brand that encouraged repeat business and mitigated skepticism. These inventive practices illustrate how women blended professionalism, creativity, and social signaling to overcome structural bias, turning workplace challenges into opportunities for influence and financial security. Economic necessity often amplified resilience. Unmarried women needed to support themselves fully, making every employment decision critical. Imagine juggling teaching, sewing, and domestic tasks in a single day, carefully rationing time, energy, and money. Some women took on multiple roles simultaneously, teaching by day, mending clothes in the evening, and occasionally running a boarding house or taking in laundry. Each effort required not only skill and discipline, but also careful navigation of social expectations, as women balanced visible propriety with practical survival. In this way, resilience was both a daily habit and a strategic necessity. Scholarship debates the extent to which workplace discrimination constrained women versus fostering ingenuity. Some historians argue that systemic bias limited opportunities, reinforced social hierarchies, and reinforced dependence on men. Others note that facing these challenges necessitated strategic thinking, entrepreneurship, and social negotiation, producing forms of resilience and influence that extended far beyond the immediate workplace. As you drift towards sleep tonight, you can hold both perspectives gently. Oppression existed, yes, but women found creative ways to assert autonomy, gain respect, and craft livelihoods that reflected both competence and independence. Health and physical stamina were also closely tied to workplace resilience. Long hours, heavy labour, and crowded living conditions could contribute to fatigue, illness, and stress. Women mitigated these risks through inventive routines, careful budgeting of energy, and the cultivation of mental resilience. Imagine returning home after a long day of teaching or sewing, lighting a candle, brewing an herbal tea, and recording notes or correspondence, creating a gentle rhythm of work, self-care, and reflection that reinforce both competence and personal well-being. Social perception intertwined with professional life. Competence alone was not always enough. Reputation, propriety, and subtle social signalling were equally important. Women had to navigate gossip, judgment, and cultural assumptions, all while maintaining authority in classrooms, workshops, or boarders' homes. One amusing anecdote describes a woman who used her pet parrot to entertain boarders while simultaneously signalling household order and skill, turning a small eccentricity into a demonstration of competence and charm. These small adaptations reveal the layered, strategic thinking unmarried women employed to navigate social and professional landscapes simultaneously. By now, as the night deepens and your body relaxes, imagine the daily rhythm of women's work: chalk dust and ink, the soft clatter of sewing needles, the murmur of students, the rustle of boarders' linens, all interwoven with careful observation, strategic negotiation, and quiet ingenuity. Workplace discrimination was real, but resilience, creativity, and skill provided ways to navigate, survive, and even thrive. Every small success, teaching a lesson well, completing a complex garment, earning repeat clients, was both a practical necessity and a subtle triumph. So tonight, as you drift further into dreams, picture unmarried women navigating workplaces with intelligence, courage, and subtle creativity. Let the hum of their quiet mastery linger. A seamstress who negotiates contracts with charm and precision. A teacher whose competence earns repeated trust. A boarder who balances tenants and income with ingenuity. Even in a world predisposed to doubt their authority, women carved spaces of independence, influence, and professional skill. Let their quiet resilience settle softly in your mind as you drift into sleep, as your eyelids grow heavy and the soft hum of your fan fills the room like a gentle lullaby. Let's drift into the world of fashion and respectability for unmarried women in 1800s America. Picture yourself standing in front of a small mirror, the candlelight flickering on the brass frame, carefully arranging a shawl or adjusting a bonnet, aware that every stitch, fold, and accessory was a subtle signal to the world about who you were and what you could manage. Clothing was more than decoration. It was a social tool, a language of propriety, and for unmarried women a way to assert dignity, competence, and sometimes even independence. Society had rigid expectations of what a respectable woman should wear, and unmarried women had to navigate these norms with care. Imagine attending a church service or a small social gathering where neighbours are quietly evaluating posture, dress, and demeanour. A properly pressed gown, neatly styled hair, or well-chosen accessory could convey competence, virtue, and respectability. Conversely, a misstep, an overly bright ribbon, worn shoes, or untidy sleeves, could spark gossip, subtly undermining credibility. Fashion was a daily negotiation between self-expression, social expectation, and practical survival. Clothing could also convey economic prudence. Unmarried women often had to balance style with frugality, mending garments, repurposing fabric, or creating layered outfits that maximised warmth and durability while remaining socially acceptable. Picture a woman carefully stitching a hem or adding lace to an old gown, turning thrift into an art form. Some women developed signature techniques, subtle touches that highlighted skill and taste, signalling both industry and refinement. Quirky examples abound. One woman reportedly embroidered tiny symbols on her gloves to discreetly indicate marital availability or independence, blending personal expression, social signalling, and playful strategy. Urban life amplified the importance of fashion. Cities offered access to materials, trends, and skilled dressmakers, but also heightened scrutiny. Imagine walking down a crowded street in Philadelphia, passing shop windows and familiar neighbours, aware that your appearance would be interpreted as a reflection of skill, propriety, and social position. For unmarried women, attire was a tool to navigate both professional and social spaces. Well-chosen clothing could bolster teaching credibility, attract boarders, or signal authority in a sewing business. Each outfit was simultaneously practical, aesthetic, and strategic. Religious and moral considerations influenced fashion as well. Churches and charitable societies emphasized modesty and decorum, creating constraints and guidance for unmarried women. You might picture a Sunday service where a well-chosen shawl signals respectability while allowing personal style, or a charitable event where small, tasteful jewellery indicates refinement without impropriety. These codes required subtle skill, balancing individuality, practicality, and community expectation, and demonstrating social intelligence as much as aesthetic taste. Quirky adaptations sometimes emerged. Some women wore distinctive hats or pins that became trademarks, creating a personal brand recognisable to neighbours and clients alike. One seamstress reportedly crafted small hand-painted accessories to complement her teaching attire, offering them as gifts or for sale, blending fashion, commerce, and social networking. Another used practical yet stylish aprons when managing a boarding house, signalling efficiency, cleanliness, and taste simultaneously. These small innovations reflected creativity, strategic thinking, and a subtle assertion of independence. Economic considerations often shaped fashion choices. With limited income, unmarried women needed clothing that could last, be repaired, or serve multiple functions. Imagine layering dresses or petticoats to transition between public teaching, private tutoring, and domestic chores. Small investments in quality fabrics, careful repairs, or creative embellishments allowed women to maintain respectability without excessive spending. Fashion was thus an intersection of survival, resourcefulness, and social signalling, reflecting both practical and strategic intelligence. Scholars debate the role of fashion in autonomy and oppression. Some argue that strict dress codes reinforced social control, limiting self-expression, and reinforcing dependency on male approval or social evaluation. Others note that women actively navigated these codes, using clothing as a tool to assert competence, cultivate reputation, and negotiate social space. Imagine a woman selecting fabrics, accessories, and colours with care, not just to conform, but to signal skill, virtue, and even subtle independence. Fashion became a canvas for agency within constraints. Communal and professional spaces magnified the stakes. In classrooms, workshops, or boarders' parlours, appearance reinforced authority. A well-maintained gown, tidy hairstyle, or thoughtful accessories could bolster confidence in students, clients, or boarders. Conversely, an untidy appearance could compromise authority or income. Quirky strategies, like wearing distinctive pins or colour-coded ribbons to communicate professional roles or availability for tutoring, reflect the inventive ways unmarried women used clothing as a subtle language of influence. Urban and rural differences shaped fashion too. In cities, trends and access to materials allowed for more expressive choices, while rural women relied on practical skills, creativity, and repurposing to maintain respectability. Imagine a woman in a small Vermont town carefully mending her dresses with embroidery, lace, and patchwork, demonstrating both thrift and refinement to neighbours, visitors, and clients. Every stitch, fold, and decorative choice was a careful negotiation of social perception, economic constraint, and personal expression, transforming everyday clothing into tools of survival and influence. By now, as the night deepens and the hum of your fan becomes part of the gentle rhythm of your room, imagine the intricate dance of fashion and respectability in unmarried women's lives. Clothes were more than garments. They were tools of autonomy, subtle influence, and social survival. Every outfit conveyed competence, propriety, and creativity. Every accessory communicated attention to detail, taste, and awareness of social expectation. Fashion, like other aspects of life, required intelligence, resourcefulness, and quiet ingenuity. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture unmarried women carefully choosing shawls, bonnets, and gowns, repairing old dresses, and adding subtle flourishes to signal skill, virtue, and independence. Let the rhythm of their daily preparation, their attention to detail, and their subtle creativity linger as a comforting backdrop, a reminder that even something as seemingly simple as clothing was imbued with strategy, resourcefulness, and quiet resilience. Fashion became a silent tool of empowerment, blending necessity, propriety, and self-expression in ways both practical and remarkable. As the soft hum of your fan blends with the night and your eyelids grow heavier, let's wander into the fascinating intersection of unmarried women and entrepreneurship in 1800s America. Picture yourself in a small shop or home workshop, the faint scent of wax, fabric, or ink mingling with the earthy aroma of the street outside, imagining how women without husbands carved out businesses, balanced risk, and negotiated social perception. For many, entrepreneurship wasn't merely a creative pursuit, it was essential for survival, a subtle assertion of independence, and sometimes a path to influence in communities that often doubted women's competence. Urban centres offered unique opportunities for women to monetize skills, from teaching and sewing to running boarding houses and small shops. Imagine a woman in Boston managing her boarding house during the day, teaching children in a rented parlour in the afternoon, and selling hand-sewn goods at a market in the evening. Each task required not only skill but strategic social awareness, cultivating reputation, negotiating contracts, and maintaining respectability in public and professional spheres. Entrepreneurship became a balancing act, blending economic necessity with social navigation. Some women specialized in niche markets. One documented case tells of a seamstress in Philadelphia who embroidered custom caps for local merchants' wives, creating both income and a subtle social network. Another ran a small tutoring business, offering lessons in arithmetic, music, and handwriting, while cleverly advertising through friends, church contacts, and discreet handbills. These ventures highlight the ingenuity required to operate successfully. A single misstep, an overlooked client, a poorly timed message, or a socially inappropriate advertisement could jeopardize reputation and livelihood simultaneously. Boarding houses were often micro-enterprises managed entirely by unmarried women. Picture a small house with a handful of rooms rented to teachers, clerks, or travelling salesmen. The owner coordinated meals, laundry, and minor repairs, balancing both hospitality and profit. Quirky anecdotes illuminate creativity. One woman reportedly kept a small parrot trained to greet boarders, charming visitors, and boosting her reputation as a hospitable and clever proprietor. Another added tiny decorative touches, embroidered curtains, painted signs, or small homemade gifts to signal skill and care, blending entrepreneurship with social perception and personal branding. Rural women also engaged in entrepreneurial work, often combining domestic skills with local commerce. Imagine a woman selling hand-stitched quilts, dried herbs, or baked goods to neighbours, travelling on foot or horseback to deliver products. Some created informal barter networks, trading goods and services for food, clothing, or assistance, demonstrating resourcefulness and social savvy. Quirky adaptations included personalised labelling, decorative packaging, or small tokens accompanying each sale, turning ordinary transactions into subtle demonstrations of taste, attention to detail, and reliability. Entrepreneurship also intersected with education and mentorship. Women teaching in small academies or private households often supplemented income by tutoring additional students, offering music lessons, or crafting educational materials. One woman reportedly created miniature maps and charts for local schools, selling them to teachers and students, blending artistry, pedagogy, and business acumen. These multi-layered ventures highlight the creativity and strategic thinking unmarried women brought to entrepreneurial life, turning limited opportunity into meaningful autonomy. Legal and social frameworks influenced entrepreneurial strategies. Property ownership, female status, and socially sanctioned work allowed unmarried women to maintain businesses, but they still faced scrutiny and gendered expectations. A woman could run a shop or boarding house, but excessive visibility, perceived immodesty, or overtly ambitious behaviour might attract gossip or legal challenges. Imagine carefully balancing signage, client interactions, and public appearance to maintain authority and credibility. Entrepreneurship demanded not only practical skill, but emotional intelligence and social finesse. Quirky adaptations reveal the playful side of women's entrepreneurial lives. One woman reportedly hand-painted miniature signs to advertise sewing services, while another secretly designed small greeting cards with intricate illustrations, distributing them to friends and clients for a small fee. These creative touches were more than aesthetic. They communicated skill, reliability and taste, while maintaining modesty and social respectability. Small acts of ingenuity like these turned survival into subtle artistry, blending commerce, social signalling and personal expression. Scholars debate whether entrepreneurship represented empowerment or necessity. Some argue that single women were forced into entrepreneurial roles by necessity, constrained by social norms and limited legal rights. Others contend that these ventures allowed women to exercise autonomy, develop professional skills, and assert influence within communities, challenging assumptions about dependence and gendered capability. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Necessity prompted action, but skill, creativity, and strategic thinking transformed survival into quiet mastery. Economics and daily routines intertwined. Women managed multiple roles simultaneously: bookkeeping, cooking, teaching, sewing, managing clients, and coordinating boarding arrangements. Imagine tracking income and expenses in a small ledger, negotiating rental agreements with precision, and balancing supplies, client expectations, and social propriety, all while maintaining personal health and composure. Entrepreneurship was as much about meticulous planning and observation as it was about skill or craft, demonstrating the remarkable ingenuity required to succeed without the support of a husband. Community and networks amplified entrepreneurial success. Women often shared tips, resources, and opportunities within clubs, church groups, and social circles. One woman reportedly borrowed a sewing machine from a friend to fulfill a large order, while another collaborated with neighbours to organise a small craft fair, dividing profits fairly and building local reputation. These networks provided practical, emotional, and social reinforcement, highlighting how collaboration could enhance survival and influence while maintaining independence. By now, as the night deepens and the hum of your fan blends into the quiet, imagine the subtle rhythms of entrepreneurial life: women teaching, sewing, managing borders, bartering goods, and creatively negotiating both social and economic landscapes. Independence required skill, ingenuity, and careful observation, and every transaction, lesson, or household decision was a quiet act of agency. Entrepreneurship became both survival and empowerment, allowing unmarried women to navigate societal constraints with intelligence, resourcefulness, and subtle flair. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture these women running small businesses, balancing client expectations, crafting, teaching, and managing homes with quiet expertise. Let their creativity, ingenuity, and subtle assertiveness linger in your mind, a comforting reminder that independence could flourish even in constrained circumstances, and that resourcefulness and courage were often the quiet tools of survival in the 19th century. As your eyelids droop and the soft hum of your fan blends with the quiet of the night, let's wander into the world of legal protections and property rights for unmarried women in 1800s America. Picture yourself in a small parlour, candlelight flickering across a leather-bound ledger, imagining the subtle complexities of laws that could both constrain and empower women. While society often assumed women were dependent on husbands or male relatives, the legal category of feme sole provided avenues for property ownership, business management, and independent contracts, creating a fragile yet significant sphere of autonomy. The legal status of a feme sole allowed unmarried women to own land, manage earnings, and sign contracts in their own name, a remarkable degree of independence for the time. Imagine reviewing a deed for a modest plot of land or a small shop, understanding that this document not only conveyed ownership but also offered a shield against social and familial control. Some women inherited property from parents, siblings, or distant relatives, turning these legal rights into economic leverage. Even small holdings could provide income, lodging, or collateral for other ventures, granting both financial security and social standing. Yet navigating the law required vigilance and skill. Legal disputes over inheritance or property were common, particularly when male relatives contested a will or claimed oversight. Imagine attending a small courthouse, surrounded by men in formal coats and solemn expressions, while lawyers debated whether you, as an unmarried woman, could manage your inheritance. Some women triumphed through careful negotiation and documentation, while others lost valuable property or income. Quirky anecdotes capture ingenuity. One woman reportedly hid a disputed deed in a hollowed-out book, buying time to secure legal counsel, while another meticulously maintained receipts and letters to prove her competence. Contracts and business arrangements were also shaped by legal frameworks. Unmarried women running shops, boarding houses, or sewing workshops often signed agreements in their own names, asserting authority in ways that married women could not. Imagine negotiating rental agreements with tenants, securing payment for sewn garments, or managing student tuition, all under the protective umbrella of femme sole status. While the law provided opportunity, social perception and practical skill remained critical. Reputation, decorum, and reliability influenced whether contracts were respected or challenged. Quirky adaptations often helped women navigate legal and social constraints. One woman reportedly developed a unique system of colour-coded receipts for her sewing business, ensuring clarity and preventing disputes with clients. Another used handwritten legal reminders in a small notebook, tracking deadlines, leases, and payments, effectively blending bureaucracy with domestic order. These creative methods underscore the combination of meticulous organisation, foresight, and ingenuity necessary for unmarried women to assert authority and maintain independence in a legal environment often dominated by men. Property ownership also intersected with social standing. Owning a house, a small shop, or a parcel of land allowed unmarried women to assert credibility, attract tenants or clients, and participate in community life. Imagine hosting boarders in a modest home, managing repairs and meals while subtly signalling competence through cleanliness, decor, and efficiency. Even small investments, like painting a sign, adding flower boxes, or maintaining a tidy yard, served as visual markers of stability and authority. These subtle acts demonstrated that property, law, and social influence were deeply intertwined. Inheritance and dowries created unique opportunities and challenges. Some women inherited modest dowries or property from parents, siblings, or childless relatives, granting them independence without marriage. Others navigated legal challenges when distant heirs or male relatives contested wills. One quirky anecdote tells of a woman who used a chain of notarized letters and careful witness records to assert her claim on a small family orchard, maintaining both income and community respect. These examples highlight how legal knowledge, meticulous documentation, and creative problem-solving allowed unmarried women to safeguard property and sustain independence. Religious institutions sometimes played a role in legal support and social legitimacy. Churches could offer advice on contracts, mediate disputes, or provide references for employment or property agreements. Imagine receiving guidance from a minister or church elder on handling a contentious rental dispute, blending moral authority with practical strategy. In some cases, small, ceremonial or symbolic gestures, like hosting a parish gathering in a rented hall, reinforced credibility and demonstrated competence, subtly intertwining law, faith, and social perception. Scholars debate the extent to which legal protections truly empowered women versus offering symbolic independence constrained by social expectations. Some argue that laws like femme sole status provided meaningful authority, enabling women to control property, negotiate contracts, and sustain livelihoods. Others suggest that social scrutiny, economic vulnerability, and the need for constant vigilance limited the practical benefits of these legal rights. As you imagine these dynamics tonight, you can sense the subtle balance. Law offered opportunity, but autonomy required intelligence, foresight, and careful navigation of social norms. Health and daily life intersected with legal responsibilities. Managing property or a business required not only practical skill, but physical and mental stamina. Imagine rising early to tend a garden, prepare rooms for boarders, balance a ledger, and respond to correspondence, all while maintaining personal health. Quirky strategies emerged to ease this burden. One woman reportedly scheduled chores according to the sun's movement, aligning physical labour with energy levels, while another kept small jars of herbal remedies within reach to manage fatigue or minor ailments. These practices reflect how legal, economic, and domestic spheres were interconnected in daily life. Urban and rural contexts shaped the experience of property ownership. In cities, contracts, leases, and client interactions required careful negotiation, while in rural areas, managing farmland, livestock, or small trades involved long-distance coordination and resourcefulness. One anecdote tells of a woman who coordinated grain sales to neighbouring farms while simultaneously teaching local children, balancing labour, legal agreements and social reputation with remarkable skill. Independence required practical intelligence, organisational skill and social awareness, whether in city or countryside. By now, as the night deepens and your fan hums steadily, imagine the subtle authority of unmarried women wielding legal protections, managing property, negotiating contracts, and asserting competence with quiet determination. Life without a husband demanded both vigilance and ingenuity, and every deed signed, ledger entry made, or tenant guided was a testament to resilience, skill, and autonomy. Legal knowledge became both shield and tool, allowing women to navigate societal constraints while maintaining dignity and influence. So tonight, as you drift further towards sleep, picture unmarried women reviewing contracts by candlelight, tending property, negotiating with clients, and maintaining meticulous records. Let the rhythm of their careful planning, quiet assertiveness, and inventive strategies linger softly in your mind, a comforting reminder that even within constraints, law, intelligence, and ingenuity allowed independence and subtle empowerment to flourish. As the night deepens and your fan hums a gentle lullaby, let's drift into the world of mental and emotional resilience for unmarried women in 1800s America. Picture yourself in a small, quiet room, perhaps with a journal or candle flickering softly on the table, contemplating how women without husbands coped with isolation, social scrutiny, and the constant demands of survival. Emotional endurance was as crucial as practical skill. Navigating life alone required careful attention to routine, creative outlets, and subtle social strategies that nurtured mental well-being while maintaining respectability. Loneliness was a common companion. In small towns or rural areas, neighbours might be miles apart and social gatherings limited to church services, occasional markets, or family events. Imagine sitting by a window at dusk, listening to the faint creak of a rocking chair, sketching, embroidering, or composing letters to distant friends or relatives. Writing, journaling, or even cataloguing household inventories became more than chores. They were exercises in mindfulness, reflection, and mental organisation, creating a sense of control and continuity in lives otherwise circumscribed by social expectation. Creative routines provided both emotional relief and practical benefit. One woman reportedly kept a small herb garden, carefully labelling each plant, noting growth patterns, and using harvested herbs for tea or remedies. She claimed the ritual calmed the mind and strengthened the hands, blending mental focus with tangible productivity. Another woman created miniature journals of neighbourhood observations, tracking weather patterns, social news, and local events. These quirky, meticulous habits allowed women to structure their days, cultivate curiosity, and maintain emotional equilibrium while navigating the constraints of unmarried life. Social networks were critical for emotional resilience. Even limited connections through church, sewing circles, or boarding houses offered support, companionship, and advice. Imagine a weekly sewing circle where women traded both stitches and stories, minor frustrations, gossip, teaching challenges, or practical strategies for managing household labour. These interactions reinforced a sense of belonging, allowed for the exchange of practical knowledge, and offered subtle validation, reminding women that they were part of a community even while living independently. Quirky anecdotes reveal ingenuity. One woman kept a compliments notebook, recording kind words from friends and neighbours to revisit during difficult times, blending emotional sustenance with playful strategy. Religious and moral engagement provided another layer of support. Participation in church activities, teaching Sunday school, organising charity events, or assisting with communal rituals offered purpose, structure, and socially sanctioned avenues for influence. Picture yourself assisting with a parish bake sale, coordinating volunteers, or preparing teaching materials, gaining both recognition and a sense of contribution. These activities allowed women to assert competence, maintain reputation, and cultivate networks, all while deriving emotional satisfaction from meaningful work. Hobbies and intellectual pursuits were equally important. Reading, music, embroidery, and educational writing were common outlets for both enjoyment and self-improvement. Imagine quietly composing letters to distant relatives, creating hand-drawn maps for local borders, or practicing piano for a small lesson group. blending skill, entertainment, and social purpose. Quirky examples illuminate creativity. One woman reportedly crafted tiny hand-painted tokens for students, blending instruction, play, and aesthetic enjoyment, while another kept a small aviary of songbirds that she claimed sang away the worries of the mind. These small acts cultivated focus, joy, and psychological resilience in an era when social support was often limited. Financial management also intertwined with emotional well-being. Maintaining control over income, rent, or craft sales required meticulous attention and self-discipline, which fostered confidence and reduced stress. Imagine balancing ledgers for a sewing business or boarding house, tracking expenditures, and anticipating potential challenges. The very act of managing resources independently reinforced a sense of competence, autonomy, and accomplishment, transforming practical necessity into an emotional anchor that nurtured resilience. Quirky coping mechanisms often blended playfulness with psychological strategy. One unmarried woman reportedly used a system of colour-coded tokens to track chores, teaching duties, and social visits, turning organisation into a playful ritual. Another crafted miniature hand-painted calendars to mark seasonal tasks, combining aesthetics, planning, and a sense of mastery. These practices, while seemingly trivial, reinforced mental focus, reduced anxiety, and provided tangible evidence of control in lives often subjected to societal scrutiny and unpredictable circumstances. Scholars debate the extent to which unmarried women's emotional resilience was forced versus cultivated. Some argue that social isolation and scrutiny imposed significant psychological strain, creating vulnerability and dependence on informal coping strategies. Others suggest that necessity fostered ingenuity, resourcefulness, and self-awareness, allowing women to develop routines, hobbies, and networks that enhanced independence and personal growth. Perhaps the truth lies in between. Resilience was simultaneously a survival mechanism and a cultivated skill, honed through daily practice, observation, and ingenuity. Health and physical routines reinforced mental endurance. Daily chores, cooking, sewing, and teaching, while physically demanding, provided structure and purpose. Imagine rising before dawn, tending a small garden, preparing meals, and managing household tasks, each act a rhythmic reinforcement of competence and control. Physical labour, when combined with creative outlets or intellectual engagement, offered both practical and psychological benefits, helping women navigate stress, maintain focus, and reinforce a sense of agency. By now, as the night deepens and your body relaxes into the gentle rhythm of the fan, picture unmarried women weaving these strategies together, journaling, teaching, sewing, gardening, participating in social or religious circles, and managing small enterprises. Each act, mundane or creative, contributed to both survival and emotional stability. Resilience was not simply endurance, it was strategy, ritual, and small creative innovations woven into daily life. A subtle and continuous assertion of competence, independence, and self-worth. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, imagine these women tending gardens, composing letters, sewing intricate patterns, hosting small social gatherings, and quietly nurturing their mental and emotional well-being. Let their ingenuity, routine, and playful strategies linger in your mind, a comforting reminder that even within constraints, resourcefulness, creativity, and subtle agency allowed women to cultivate strength, purpose, and resilience across the challenges of 19th century life. As the night deepens and the soft hum of your fan wraps the room in quiet, let's wander into the delicate and often overlooked world of friendship and mentorship for unmarried women in 1800 America. Picture yourself seated in a cozy parlour, candlelight flickering against the walls, listening to the faint murmur of neighbours in distant houses, and imagining how critical social bonds were for women navigating a life without husbands. Friends, mentors, and informal networks were more than companions. They were lifelines, sources of emotional support, guidance, and practical assistance that helped women endure scrutiny, isolation, and the complexities of daily survival. Mentorship often began in families, extended kin networks, or within social circles. Imagine a slightly older cousin offering advice on managing a boarding house, stretching income, or negotiating work contracts, blending practical skill with subtle guidance. These relationships could be life-saving in a world that scrutinized unmarried women relentlessly, providing both instruction and validation. A mentor might offer lessons on proper social etiquette, safe investment of earnings, or how to handle delicate gossip, equipping younger women with tools to navigate both independence and societal expectation. Friendship extended beyond family, often forming through shared work, church activities, or social clubs. Picture a small sewing circle or literary society where women gathered weekly, exchanging tips on craft, teaching, or domestic management, while offering encouragement and support. These spaces created both practical and emotional networks, allowing women to share resources, apprentices, or clients, while providing emotional validation in a society that often questioned their worth. One quirky anecdote tells of a friend who left tiny anonymous notes with compliments or advice for boarders, strengthening relationships while subtly guiding behaviour, a playful, inventive, and socially savvy tactic. Emotional support was as crucial as practical guidance. Loneliness, social scrutiny, and the stress of self-reliance demanded outlets for conversation, reassurance, and shared experience. Imagine confiding in a peer about financial anxiety, the burden of household labour, or the frustration of being underestimated, and receiving both empathy and practical advice in return. These informal networks allowed women to process challenges, celebrate small victories, and maintain mental resilience, creating a sense of continuity and belonging in an otherwise isolating social structure. Intellectual exchange also flourished in these bonds. Women shared books, letters, teaching strategies, or small scholarly pursuits, expanding knowledge and refining skills. One documented case tells of a group of unmarried women who collaborated on miniature educational materials, circulating handwritten maps, charts, and lesson plans among each other and local students. These creative collaborations offered both practical benefit and intellectual stimulation, cultivating confidence, skill, and influence, while reinforcing social respectability. Shared knowledge became both currency and empowerment. Quirky mentorship stories often reveal inventive strategies. One woman reportedly trained a younger friend to manage a small boarding house by creating a series of playful scenarios, simulating tenant disputes or supply shortages, teaching problem-solving through imaginative role-playing. Another shared tiny notebooks detailing household organisation, income management, and tips for dealing with difficult clients, blending mentorship with practical instruction. These methods illustrate the subtle creativity and care women employed to cultivate independence while nurturing the next generation of competent, resilient, and socially adept unmarried women. Religious and charitable networks reinforced friendship and mentorship. Women teaching Sunday school, organising charitable events, or managing church activities often guided younger or less experienced peers, providing instruction, moral guidance, and professional support. Imagine coordinating a bake sale or charity bazaar, mentoring a younger woman in managing tasks and interacting with community members, simultaneously fostering practical skills, social confidence, and emotional reassurance. Mentorship in these spaces was both socially sanctioned and deeply influential, strengthening communal ties and cultivating self-reliance in tangible ways. Friendship and mentorship also played critical economic roles. Trusted peers could recommend clients, share housing or supplies, or collaborate on projects to generate income. One eccentric example tells of a group of unmarried women pooling resources to purchase bulk fabric, then dividing tasks for sewing and selling garments, blending practicality, ingenuity, and social cohesion. Another woman reportedly left small tip jars with her protégés, offering playful advice alongside minor financial support, a quirky, creative form of mentorship that reinforced both independence and community. Scholars debate whether these networks were primarily supportive or subtly restrictive. Some argue that social bonds maintained conformity, reinforcing propriety and dependence on social validation. Others suggest that friendship and mentorship provided crucial avenues for empowerment, skill building, and social influence, allowing women to navigate challenges and assert agency while maintaining respectability. In reality, both dynamics coexisted. Bonds offered guidance and safety while also imposing norms, requiring careful negotiation and social intelligence. Health, emotional well-being, and practical survival were deeply intertwined with mentorship. Learning from experienced women how to manage fatigue, household chores, or entrepreneurial ventures allowed unmarried women to preserve both physical and mental health. Quirky anecdotal evidence shows inventive strategies for emotional resilience. One woman shared a mood ledger with a friend, tracking energy, accomplishments, and small triumphs to boost morale. Another taught breathing exercises and miniature gardening to maintain calm amidst overwhelming tasks. These shared routines nurtured endurance, competence, and subtle joy. By now, as your body relaxes and the soft hum of the fan lulls the room, imagine a network of women connected by guidance, friendship, and mentorship, sharing knowledge, advice, and encouragement, practicing inventive survival strategies, and cultivating competence, independence, and quiet influence. These networks were invisible scaffolds, quietly supporting emotional, practical, and social well-being. Every conversation, shared tip, or playful collaboration was a soft assertion of agency, resilience, and skill, a gentle but profound testament to the ingenuity of unmarried women navigating the 19th century. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture women mentoring, advising, and supporting one another in parlours, workshops, churches, and homes. Let the rhythm of their friendships, ingenuity, and subtle guidance settle in your mind, a comforting reminder that independence was not solitary. Community, creativity, and mentorship provided the foundation for resilience, competence, and emotional survival, quietly shaping lives and legacies in ways both practical and deeply human. As the night deepens and the soft hum of your fan blends into the quiet, let's drift into the theme of legacy and long-term impact for unmarried women in 1800s America. Picture yourself sitting in a small study, candlelight flickering across ledgers, notebooks, and small collections of embroidered or handcrafted items, considering how women who lived independently left subtle but enduring marks on their families, communities, and even local economies. Their influence was rarely written in history books, yet it persisted through teaching, mentorship, property management, and social engagement, quietly shaping the next generation's possibilities and perspectives. Unmarried women often left tangible legacies in education. Imagine a woman who spent decades teaching local children, passing on skills in literacy, arithmetic, music, or manners. Generations of students carried forward her lessons, sometimes documenting gratitude in letters, journals, or small commemorations. One quirky anecdote tells of a retired teacher whose former students created a handmade quilt, using scraps from their own homes, stitching her initials into the centre as a gesture of enduring respect. These acts demonstrate that influence extended far beyond the walls of classrooms and into the social and cultural fabric of communities. Property ownership and financial management also left lasting marks. Women who managed farms, boarding houses, or small businesses often ensured stability for relatives, apprentices, or boarders after their death. Imagine the careful ledgers, contracts, and household instructions left behind, meticulous notes on tenant agreements, sewing orders, or garden layouts, providing guidance for those who would continue their work. Quirky stories illustrate inventive touches in legacy planning. One woman left detailed instructions for a miniature indoor herb garden, claiming it would teach practicality, patience, and observation to her nieces, a playful yet instructive inheritance. Mentorship and friendship networks became living legacies as well. Women trained younger friends, protégés, or students, passing on knowledge of teaching, domestic management, business, and social navigation. Imagine a woman quietly instructing a younger relative in bookkeeping, sewing techniques, or managing borders, not just to earn income but to cultivate independence and resilience. These lessons rippled outward. Protégés went on to teach, manage households, or run small enterprises, perpetuating skills, social intelligence, and subtle agency long after the original mentor's lifetime. Creative contributions also endured. Women often left small handcrafted items, journals, or collections of work that served as both memory and instruction. One documented case tells of a woman who bound a series of miniature maps and local guides for her friends and pupils, leaving a tangible resource for teaching and community knowledge. Another left a collection of meticulously sewn samplers, each displaying stitches, patterns, and colour techniques intended to instruct and inspire others. These objects, while seemingly minor, became vessels of skill, taste, and practical ingenuity, quietly shaping local culture and community memory. Religious and charitable engagement reinforced lasting impact. Women who participated in church activities, charity collections, or community education projects often influenced both social norms and communal expectations. Imagine a woman organising a charity bake sale, library reading circle, or Sunday school programme, leaving systems and practices that continued long after her involvement ended. Even seemingly small acts, teaching etiquette, mentoring young girls, or crafting goods for charity, carried enduring influence, shaping values, skills, and social cohesion for years to come. Quirky legacies sometimes emerged in unexpected ways. One woman reportedly installed small hand-painted markers in her garden to instruct visitors on herbs and flowers, leaving an educational and aesthetic imprint that survived generations. Another maintained a library of curiosities, small notebooks documenting local plants, weather patterns, and economic strategies, which were later consulted by neighbours and apprentices. These playful, inventive contributions highlight the creativity, foresight, and subtle teaching that unmarried women wove into everyday life, leaving marks that were practical, intellectual, and emotional. Scholars debate whether unmarried women's legacies were limited by social constraints or enhanced by independence. Some argue that lack of marriage restricted influence to private, localised spheres, making legacies subtle and difficult to trace. Others contend that autonomy enabled women to cultivate skills, networks, and projects that extended impact beyond family and social expectations, often leaving richer, more diverse contributions than might have been possible within traditional marital roles. The balance of constraint and opportunity produced legacies both quiet and enduring, visible in material culture, social networks, and educational lineage. Health, resilience, and practical skill also shaped legacy. Women who managed their own health, property, and work created examples of self-sufficiency for relatives and protégés. Imagine the care put into household manuals, medicinal notes, or financial ledgers, demonstrating meticulous organisation, foresight, and responsibility. Quirky anecdotes illustrate ingenuity. One woman left instructions for a rotating system of teaching, household chores, and garden care for nieces, blending instruction, routine, and a playful sense of structure. These legacies reinforced competence and independence, modelling survival strategies for those who would follow. By now, as your surroundings sink into stillness and the soft hum of the fan merges with your breathing, picture the cumulative impact of unmarried women's lives. Classrooms enriched by decades of teaching, households managed with precision and foresight, communities strengthened through mentorship and charity, and creative works preserved for future generations. Each stitch, ledger entry, lesson taught, or social connection carried forward influence, demonstrating that independence and ingenuity left an enduring imprint, even in a society structured around marriage. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, imagine women leaving their mark quietly but profoundly, through property, teaching, mentorship, creativity, and social engagement. Let their subtle legacies linger in your mind, a comforting reminder that independence, resilience, and ingenuity can create enduring influence, and that survival without a husband did not mean a life without meaning, mastery, or quiet triumph. Their lives, full of clever strategies, emotional resilience, and practical skill, continue to echo softly across the centuries, leaving lessons in resourcefulness and courage for all who follow. As the night deepens and your room settles into quiet, let's take a slow, gentle breath and reflect on the remarkable lives of unmarried women in 1800s America. Picture their daily routines. The early mornings, the meticulous sewing, the careful ledger entries, the gardens tended, the lessons taught, and the meals prepared with patience and precision. Every action was both survival and subtle assertion of autonomy. These women navigated a world structured around marriage, yet they found ways to live independently, thoughtfully, and with quiet ingenuity. They turned ordinary tasks into tools of skill, resilience, and even creativity. Their lives remind us that independence doesn't always roar. It often hums quietly through small, deliberate acts. A well-mended dress, a lesson carefully planned, a ledger maintained with care, a seed planted in a garden, all were expressions of agency. They cultivated networks of friendship and mentorship, blended resourcefulness with imagination, and left legacies in education, property, and social influence. Even in constrained circumstances, they created systems, rituals, and small pleasures that sustained both themselves and the communities around them. Quirky anecdotes, clever inventions, and playful strategies peppered daily life, revealing humour, intelligence, and adaptability alongside resilience. As you sink deeper into your pillow, let their resourcefulness, perseverance, and subtle mastery linger with you. Imagine them walking through their towns, classrooms, or homes, quietly shaping their world with determination, creativity, and care. Life without a husband was not always easy, but it was far from powerless. In the ordinary, you can sense extraordinary ingenuity. In the routine, a quiet triumph. Let these images settle around you like a soft blanket, a comforting presence, reminding you that independence, courage, and ingenuity can quietly persist, and even flourish through challenges and constraints, leaving legacies that echo across generations.